make sure the chat's on.
Okay, now I can start talking. Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. I'll just make sure that you're coming through on the stream okay. Yeah?
Okay, great. So,
Yeah.
good day, everybody. I go by Connann Barbarin. I would like to thank Perspective Philosophy for having me here. And that's it for my introduction. I should probably start with my argument. Is that so, right? Correct?
Go for it, man.
Okay, so I want to say that my view of morality is completely and only descriptive. I try as little as possible, as hard as possible, not to make any prescriptive claims. I am the one of the belief that there is odd gap cannot be crossed. I know that you probably disagree. And I think that morality is inter-human system of behavior based and reliant upon the existence of the moral instinct, and moral instinct being an evolutionary trait in humans, and there is no evidence or indication that animals are part of it other than as property. And since that is the case, I have no reason or incentive to become vegan and stop exploiting animals as resources.
Okay, so in brief, if I understand your argument, essentially you're taking a descriptivist approach to ethics or morality. You believe the is-ought gap cannot be crossed, and that the moral instinct that which has evolved within humans, perhaps for pro-social behaviors, doesn't include animals. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, great. Okay, so I guess the first things that I need to understand is basically why you believe the is-ought gap cannot be resolved. So I know you watched my video on, you were saying this before we started, that you watched my video on objective ethics, and obviously in that video I gave an argument for what's called the functional concepts. Do you deny the existence of functional concepts? So, for example, concepts that contain potentiality or a notion of completeness, a telos?
Yes, by your you try to cross this gap by saying that good is not a noun, that it should be an adjective, and I would argue that it is a very inadequate adjective. It conveys very little information. It only contains information to that something is in accordance with your wishes or preferences. No, nothing else. If I say I have a good watch, you have no idea of what watch I'm trying to describe. Only that I'm happy with my watch. Nothing else.
I mean, you could argue that obviously the notion could be separate from your preferences at any given time anyway. So, for example, I could say that someone was a good serial killer.
Yes.
Yeah, and I might really dislike serial killers.
But yes, you can dislike serial killers.
Well, the function as like of being a serial killer is what is created.
A good serial killer also doesn't give me any information on what does it mean to be a good serial killer. A good serial killer just means that it is a serial killer which you think is successful.
Well, yeah, but I mean that's the point. That's the sort of the Aquinian or Aristotelian.
You can also say that a good serial killer is when you can describe your neighbor as a good serial killer because he is good to you. You understand? The good is as in adjective conveys limited information, and that information is not quite.
I think it does. It conveys a notion in relation to the nature or the form of the thing in question. So if we're talking metaphysically, if we're saying like the is-ought gap can't be crossed, the notion is that the is-ought gap can't be crossed because there is nothing from which there is no, let's say, nature or function, inherent telos within a given object, which is then being judged. So if I was to say, like, Aristotle says like the good knife is one that cuts, right?
Not necessarily.
Yeah, well, we can get onto that. So, like, the idea would be, like, obviously, well, a good knife mightn't be one that cuts if you're getting stabbed by it or something like that. Obviously, your judgment.
The good knife can have some other value to you. You can have a knife that is bedighted by jewels and gold and all of that, and it can be completely dull, and you will say, "Oh, that's a good knife." If it is a dress knife or whatever,
Use value versus exchange value or something like that is what you kind of point out.
no,
like,
you can simply value it for the other purpose than what you are valuing for.
Well, I mean, yeah.
Well,
I guess like the question would be is like, what do we value objects as, and like, what do we value?
well, we value all of us value different objects differently.
But why do we value like so? Like just saying like just because we do, like so like one, you can't say that we all do because I think that's actually like a bold claim. You couldn't say that all of our preferences are actually indeterminate necessarily, because then that would require some sort of metaphysical proof, right? You'd have to say like the reason that we do or do not value a given thing. So like we all seemingly value food, water, and shelter, right? You know, like we all
that is not true.
Do or not? So you know someone that doesn't value food, water, and shelter?
Yes. Don't you know about those people who think that they live from energy of the sun? They don't value food as such.
Do you mean the mentally ill?
Well, even if they are mentally ill, that is to be determined. I'm not a physician, but
who believes the sun is mentally ill?
Well, I am not a physician. I will not make that judgment.
But
it is beyond the point. They have ability to value things, so they can value whatever they want.
Yeah, but one, like this is, I guess this is where we could get onto that, I guess, because it's important. But like, for example, I think them being mentally ill is vitally important to how they understand themselves. If they believe themselves to be made of glass, for example, and so really value Windex because they think that it'll keep them nice and shiny, then their belief is based on a false consciousness, like a false notion of reality. They don't understand themselves correctly, and so their notion of their preferences has been built up incorrectly in the first place. Do you see what I'm saying? So that values, they don't actually value what they think they value.
They value, it is unimportant what you think they value. They value things because they value things. Again, I don't
there is a notion of
have prescriptive claims to their, I'm simply explaining their behavior.
Yeah, so like the point I'm making is that the reason that they think they value something is built off a notion of what they think they will achieve, or a world that they believe will bring them some sort of good experience or something like that. It's not like some vacuous notion. Like I don't just say I value kitchen roll, and then someone just goes like, why? And it's just like kitchen roll. Like it would be meaningless. What I even mean by value, then it becomes.
Yeah, I don't know what kitchen roll is.
It's just paper that's used in kitchens.
Oh, kitchen roll. Sorry, I didn't understand you.
Yeah. So like when we look at, let's say, like something like someone saying like arbitrarily choosing a value, right? Like the value really isn't arbitrarily determined. It's in relation to an expression of drive. Even when you say like people's preferences are.
Yes, expression of drive, but then not all people have the same drive to the same extent. Right?
No, they don't have to. Like so, like, but the thing is that how they understand their preferences is based on how they understand themselves. So even their moral goal comes from a notion of self-understanding. And so, someone who's mentally ill in this, who understands themselves to be made of glass, understands themselves to photosynthesize like a plant, they're going to create. They're going to have what's called like basically a false consciousness. They're going to have a notion of value which doesn't actually respect the value that they believe they're achieving. Like it's like someone who believes that if they jump off a cliff they'll fly. Well, they might really value the notion of flying, but they're not actually gonna fly.
But they will still jump, right?
Yeah, but that doesn't make it valuable. So jump.
Well, it does make it valuable. It is in there. It is. Well, you all say that it is not really valuable. I'm saying that it does make them valuable to them. I have no. I don't like to use the word right, but I have what they value or they don't is mute upon me, so I don't care.
So like just to clarify, so you would say something like someone, let's say, being like someone setting themselves on fire, jumping off a cliff, doing all of the acts of self-destruction, which ultimately bring them experiences of great pain, which they may experience as negative value are still valuable if they had the belief that it was valuable. So values based off someone's belief state.
Well, a lot of people set themselves on fire willingly and with the expectation of producing value to them. I would like to point out to those Buddhist monks who had set themselves on fire for for a variable goals of protest, usually to protest some sort of government.
Yes, they had a political goal, right? That relates to like reality, and like obviously
it does relate to reality, but in that case, you would say that they are setting themselves on fire, that they should not value something else over setting themselves on fire. And I see that as in the defensible position.
So like this is the thing, like if like take for example a political protest and the valuing of, let's say, an abstract concept, that can be done rationally. My point is to say that someone who had a false consciousness, a belief about themselves which was inaccurate, like basically thinking they're a plant made of glass, something like that, their notions of value, like they'd be essentially doing that reasoning is flawed. Like that's what makes them mentally ill there. So it's not like they're actually obtaining the value that they believe they were obtaining. So like that you're just essentially saying like
they have an expectation of value. Same as whenever I do I agree with that. Action, I have expectation that it will bring me value. And if it does not bring you value, then well, tough shit for me. But I have the expectation same as them, and I don't see a difference.
Yeah. Okay. So let's say you have the I mean, the difference would be what you are. That's the key difference, right? Like an understanding of self-knowledge. So like the expectation of value, whether it actually hits or like whether your preference actually achieves a desirable goal, is dependent upon self-knowledge. So if there is like a truth maker in this, which is the experience of value. So like an individual's preference might be the assigning of an arbitrary value in the sense that they rationally come up with this notion that, you know, jumping off a cliff, drinking bleach, setting themselves on fire is good because they think they are made of something else that's not flesh, blood and bone, and they won't feel pain and suffering and they won't have a negative value response. Or they have an understanding of themselves which doesn't relate politically to others. They might think that they'll transcend into a realm of absolute nirvana and bliss or something like that, right? Now, what the point I'm making is that if an individual has an understanding of themselves and they are constructing a rational goal, then they'll have that truth maker at the end, which will be the
goal doesn't need to be rational.
It does. Everything.
No, why?
Everything does.
Well, we can go into discussion of what is actually what is not. Maybe we should go back to a more narrow field.
It's like if veganism. Incoherent. If that goal is incoherent, then there is no like value there necessarily, because it could be negative value just as much as it's positive value. So they're not assigning value. They're not assigning anything. It's absurd. That's why it needs to be rational. Everything needs to be rational.
That's the claim. I will not discuss this claim today, but I would say that what you consider rational might not be what they would consider rational, and you would say that their action is irrational, and it could be completely rational from their point of view. But,
okay. Rational is just like obeying the laws of logic.
Well, I am not expert on field of philosophy, but from what I know, there is several sorts of logics, and not all are the same, and they are often contradictory.
Logic almost exclusively. There is only a few that argue for, let's say, true contradictions. But
well, there is someone who agrees with this. I will not be that person this day, but some other time maybe. Okay, so can we go back on morality?
No, because it's important, because when we're talking about the assigning of value, for it to be a value, for it to be anything, it needs to be able to say that it's not, that it's itself and not its negation. Otherwise, and as the principle of explosion, which is what I'm saying happens in terms of mental illness and people trying to arbitrarily assign value. So like this is why reason needs to be important. Now that's just like an epistemological point. So you could say that would, like, in terms of an individual being, let's say, a subjectivist, You could say that you could be a rational, like, norm expressivist or quasi-realist or something like that. And it actually, when they're assigning these values arbitrarily, that they're doing so in a way that is logically consistent if still arbitrary. And I'm assuming that's probably who you would use as an example. So you'd be like, all right, there is a person who is assigning values rationally, but it is coming from, let's say, a subjective basis.
Yes, let's say that forever. But I don't understand one thing. Why are you so arguing for that E-zone gap is possible to cross? Because that is actually very damaging to the arguments for veganism. Because if humans are omnivores, they ought to eat omnivore food, right?
No, I mean, that would be the wrong way to look at it. One, I mean, you'd have to argue that humans are omnivores, as in terms of.
Oh, well, I can argue that very effectively.
Okay, I mean, just because you can't eat meat doesn't necessarily medically benefit you to eat meat. So, like,
well, it doesn't make that it benefits you. It doesn't make benefits you to drink beer, but vegans still can drink beer.
Doesn't mean it's good for the cat to eat carbohydrates. It's like,
yeah. So, but
that doesn't make it a cat an omnivore.
No, a cat is purely a carnivore.
So, for example, like humans,
and by your definition, cat is ought to eat meat, right?
We don't produce our own vitamin C. We're dependent upon was it like we don't produce our own vitamin C? We've got 26 feet of intestines. Even the size of our teeth. I think that we're best described as actually crocodivores, beings who eat cooked food would probably be the best.
That is true. But what we cook all of things that is edible, and that is including meat. And it would be preposterous to say that we are not omnivores. There is a scientific agreement on that point.
Well, no, I think you could say that we're like crocodivores, but I think you could say that we're like mostly herbivorous. It's like in terms of even being an omnivore. But even saying that, like, look, like even if we were to accept the humans were omnivores, it wouldn't even lead to the conclusion that we ought to eat meat. It would only say like I think this misses the concept behind functional, like what a functional concept is trying to convey, which is a telos, that there is a notion of completion, an overall goal, which is what we are driven towards. So, like,
well, we are driven to survive and reproduce.
But I don't think so. I think that evolutionary approach is mistaken. One, because it's physically reductive.
Interesting.
One, because it's physically reductive, and then two, because it misses the complexity of human life and even animal life. I think sentient beings experience value not at the point of, let's say, notions of species and survival, but actually in terms of reward and punishment within their lives. So I think even in terms of like an evolutionary approach, you would see the values as actually being phenomenologically produced by a reward response by your brain.
Yes, that is absolutely correct. When I say we are driven to survive and procreate, I was
so it's not procreation. It would just be orgasm. It wouldn't be. I think that this is flat and untrue, but it wouldn't be procreation. It would be like orgasm. It wouldn't be eating food. It would be the sensation of pleasure. So like this is why people who, for example, consume, unhealthy products, for example, like alcohol, it produces a reward within the like a dopamine response, which is then an experience of value rather than
on lower levels. That is correct. When you were saying there is an overarching goal, I was extrapolating from this lower goals.
That the overarching goal would be necessarily one based on the physical success. Like
what would be the overarching goal?
I would say that would be the proliferation of that value. Like looking at the goal,
value?
The experience of value in our lives phenomenologically. See, that's why I don't look towards value being like arbitrarily assigned, because then I'll just say it's begging the question. I'd say that there is value experienced or there is not. And if there is not value experienced, then the goal...
I would certainly agree that there is desirable and undesirable feelings. I have no problem with admitting that.
Yeah, so if we have, let's say, drives, that moves us towards the creation of desires. Because I think looking towards desires is even being flat. Let's say you'd say, like, we all have a desire for reproduction, I think is, again, like a very...
not all, but let's say on average.
Or even most of us. I don't think it's necessarily a desire for reproduction. I think that misses the way that what drives are sublimated. It's far more artificial. It's not necessarily something produced by nature, but it's something produced by a sublimated consciousness. So we have, let's say, the empirical possibility, which is the satisfaction of drives within a reward system, positive and negative stimuli. And then we have individuals trying to express that reward system in a way which creates the greatest amount of positive and the least amount of negative for themselves. And then if we talk about what the self is, in terms of not just an individuated consciousness, which I think is what most people assume the self is. This would be like most people assume, you are one mind who is just totally isolated from other minds, and this is what the self actually is. Like the self is the ego, and that again presupposes egoism, and it leads to, like, say, a Randian conclusion. You could understand the self as being produced by social consciousness, mutual recognition, and so the self is the substance of mind, which is the collection of all minds in reality. So when we talk about the expression,
I'm definitely not part of the Borg.
Who said anything about the Borg? You're part of humanity.
That's your interpretation. I am only one mind because in my head I only hear one voice, right? But I don't see what this has to do with anything that we were talking about.
I'll explain. Describe yourself.
I am a human. That's his description enough for this.
Universal. Okay. One universal. Describe yourself with another term.
I am a male.
Another universal. Try and use something that's a particular. Something totally and absolutely individuated to yourself.
I have a unique DNA signature.
I, they will say that's the individual, have a unique DNA signature. Okay, so you have DNA. So DNA is a universal, right? So you have a DNA signature which is particular to yourself.
And the point of all of this is what?
Everything you use to describe yourself is a universal term of self-association. You can only understand yourself as an individual of a collective. So even being an individual is to a self-associate. So when you've self-associated, you've already extrapolated value.
Of course, I'm not alone in the universe. It doesn't mean that
Even
I'm
you're alone in the
part
universe.
of any other mind other than myself.
It's like your notions of self-understanding, of understanding of value, of your preferences are built up of self-association. So to understand your preferences relies upon what is called mutual recognition. You have somebody else look at you and you understand yourself in reference to them. And so the basis of your value is always referential to another. So how you understand that value and express it in your life can never be perfectly subjectively expressed by some sort of internal will, because the way that you rationalize and construct your desires is from a universal format. The content of your drives has nothing to do with some sort of uniquely particularized way of understanding your life, which is, coded into your being. It's actually a rational construction from a sociological environment.
Okay, great. What does that have to do with veganism?
Okay, so I would say that all minds, like in terms of how we understand value and we talk about otherness, how I understand myself is essentially, as I said, the internalization of basically me looking at you and you looking at me. So it's a self-other relationship. So in that, we have the relationship between minds, and because of that, what we do is we rely upon a notion of we project our consciousness onto the consciousness of onto the other objects of our experience, which are resisting our will, and give them and understand them as independent minds making judgments which are equally valid to our own. And the reason they have to be equally valid is because if they weren't equally valid, then we would have no ability to essentially form a shared conceptual basis.
Okay, I agree with all that you said for now.
Okay, animals are part of that. Animals are part of that collective. So when we have notions of value, subjectivity, and even the concept of mind and consciousness, which is really just a subject-object relationship, which we're projecting outwards. I want X, and you want X, and that's just a relationship between understanding that we are individuals driven towards a goal. That animals are within that, so we understand that value when we're talking about expressing it in a way that's rational and actually allows us to obtain our goals.
Okay,
Only obtain
to see if I understood you correctly. I want shit and pigs want shit. Is that correct?
It would be more like you want a moral goal. So like you have a moral goal, pigs have a moral goal, and in that your judgment of what is valuable and their judgment of valuable.
Before we could say that I have a moral goal and pigs have a moral goal, we would need to agree what moral goal is. But when I say I want X and pigs want Y, that is what you are saying, right?
No, I mean, like if you were to say, to say that you want a specific moral goal would miss what is actually. So like you could say that two people would in the first interactions have specific moral goals, but the correctness and validity of those goals, the coherence, and the justification of those goals are mutually derived. They're not derived prior to the individual entering the relationship. Entering the relationship is what allows me to understand X is my goal.
Well, X is your goal and that will be back in the question, but still, because X is your goal, you could have multiple reasons why you choose to pursue X. But
okay, so if it's got to be rationally derived, I could have multiple reasons. And those reasons are based off self-association in a way that's got to be coherent, make sense.
Yes, so what do my goals have to do with you, for instance?
You're dependent upon me for an understanding of yourself.
Okay, my goal is to acquire, let's say, a yacht. What does that have to do with you?
So if you went one, assuming your goal, let's say your goal in reality is not necessarily the requiring of a yacht. If you were to say that let's say it is. Let's say you believe you want a yacht. So your moral goal that you've presumed is you want a yacht. The reason that you've presumed that is because you believe that a yacht will make you experience some notion of positivity. Whether it will or not is dependent upon self-knowledge, which is dependent upon your association with me.
Okay, right? And what does that have to do with... this is very convoluted for no reason.
It's essentially showing that. It basically shows that any individual's moral goals are based off self-knowledge, and that's
I wouldn't call me wanted a yacht or a moral goal. It is a goal. I wouldn't give it a moral label.
Why not?
Because I don't think it is a morally significant question. I don't think it has anything to do with morality.
Well, so you don't think that you could be right or wrong in your desire to your behaviors to try and acquire a yacht? So if it led you to a life of, let's say, slaving for 60 years so that you could buy a yacht, you wouldn't say that process might have had moral significance?
No, if I want I already gave my definition of what I think morality is. On the beginning of this conversation, I can repeat it, but I don't see any other appropriate use of that word. As I said, good and bad is not the words that I use. I don't think they are very accurate. They convey very little information, and I tend not to use them.
Simple as approval and disapproval, right? And
I think that's basically what I said.
Yeah, so if we boil that down to understanding judgments. So if I make a judgment and you make a judgment, how we make those judgments based off self-association, which is based off a game essentially that we're playing in relation to each other, trying to create some sort of value in our lives, then the only way that we can actually maximize value is by maximizing a universal value. Since what value is universal association?
Well, I only need to maximize value for me. I don't need to maximize value for you.
But okay, what's value for you?
Let's say it is acquiring a yacht for.
No, but I mean, what is? No, okay, yeah, no, you can't just say the value is acquiring a yacht. I'm saying what is valuable. Like, what makes the yacht value? What gives the yacht its value?
I want it.
Okay, and what makes that want? What would make that first order desire endorsable? As in, you go, oh, I'm going to endorse that one, other than another desire.
I believe that it will give me the. I believe that would be the best use of my time and resources. That it would grant me the most benefit.
Why would it grant you the most benefit?
That is my expectation.
What do you mean by benefit?
That is my expectation.
What do you mean by benefit?
It would be the most. It would provide me with most pleasure. Let's say.
Okay, and pleasure is just the experience of positive value within your life.
Yes.
Okay, and why do you think that that's good?
I did not say that it is good.
You said that it's valuable.
Yeah.
So it's approvable.
Yeah, it's approvable by me. Mm.
Why is so? It's approvable by you. So if you were to go for and you say like this is, so let's say there's two individuals and they are trying to express that they're trying to construct concepts, like these universals, right?
Okay.
And so one is one points towards benefit, value. Let's say
what
benefit.
Sort of value? What sort of benefit?
No. I'm just saying like the words themselves. Like they're saying like what it means is for me to have value, to have this experience of pleasure. Well, that's inaccessible to the other individual, or at least they can only be accessed from a moment of self-association. So, wait a minute. So you mean that experience of value that I have? So when you say valuable, you mean what brings me pleasure? Think about how words are constructed.
Words are constructed as a source of transmitting information, right? Yes. And I speak English, you speak English. I think that we are able to exchange information adequately with the words that we have.
Okay, like so. What would you do? So when you say like this, so do you think the information is available prior to it being constructed in terms of a language? Let's say you could have knowledge prior to a language.
Well, you can definitely have knowledge without having a language. But
I disagree.
Well, you disagree.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you never saw anything that you didn't know the name for? Oh.
I would probably say that the only thing that you could have like in terms of knowledge without a language maybe would be through again self-association, like pre-linguistic, behavioristic self-association. But then again, like,
if it's pre-linguistic, then it's pre-language, right?
But even then, I'd say like when we come to actual knowledge, I would say that knowledge is derived from, let's say, demonstration, like the possibility of things like falsification and verification.
Okay, sorry, I'm a bit maybe slow, but are we now arguing about the meaning of particular words?
Well, this is the thing. I'm saying that words can't be particularized to an individual.
No, I mean particular words as these specific words.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, but let's take the specific word of good, bad, right, wrong, value. Any of these words that you would use to construct.
Okay, let's take these words and not use them.
Well, no,
to be easy for all.
Well, I'm saying that anyone who engages in terms of preference, in terms of expressing their preferences. So if I say I want an apple and I go to try and find an apple, then I've had to use words to do that. Anyone that tries to express that,
you didn't use the words good or bad or wrong or right.
Yeah, I could have just used like I want, and which is
much more accurate description of your desires.
It's an expression of drive, of desire, but that desire is based on like an object-subject relationship.
Yeah, I don't care about what is based.
Means ends association. So like the drive is like the means. I'm gonna like the drive expresses a means ends relationship in the sense that like if I think I want, so if I go I want an apple, I'm going to go and get an apple. So I have the means, which is going like in walking, let's say, to the supermarket and then buying an apple, and getting the apple would be the consumption of the apple, right? So like we have a means and an ends. We have essentially a process which ends in a which ends in like a telos, an end, a valued state, a state of apparent value. That's what we're going towards, right?
Okay, so what?
So this would be what I would describe as a function.
Okay, so
like the evaluation of that function. So if I go like, do I want an apple? I'm going to relate it to a function prior to wanting the apple. So I'm going to say like, well, what is it about all of my desires that they share in terms of their capacity of bringing me towards an end that I genuinely want, which is a question of self-knowledge.
well,
And that
I don't know if you can say that what you genuinely want is different than what you want at every given moment. I think that would be a disingenuous notion. You cannot say that anything that any action that you do is not your want to do as at that particular moment. Of course, if that action is done through voluntary means, I don't mean.
Well, it'd be more like if like take for example, you did this just before. You said like, oh well, what the reason I would think that it was beneficial was pleasure. You boiled it down to, let's say, a positive state of experience.
Yes, and I don't need to boil it any further. It is sufficient for my understanding of the world. I don't need to go further.
I'm just saying, okay. Like the point is that when you're doing that goal, you're saying that I value not. It's not that you value the object for itself. You said that you value it for pleasure.
But yeah, I value it for the apparent benefit that will get
value
me.
If you were to say that something is valuable, you don't go beneath pleasure because nothing beneath it. You go like, oh, it's value. Well, that you'd have to just point towards it. It becomes ostensive. But in terms of in terms of your other drives, it's demonstrative. You've got to actually explain why you would want that.
Why?
Because otherwise it might lead to unhappiness, which is what you would experience in your daily life. Have you ever tried to get something and then felt unbelievable?
Oh yes, I failed many times.
Yes, it's horrible, and we seek
to undesirable.
Yeah. But it's about knowledge of desire, just second order desires. So second order desires are based off self-knowledge, which is based off self-association, which is based off mutually understood value between consciousness, which includes animals.
It includes animals how?
Because they are also conscious.
So I don't give a shit about if they are conscious or not.
Yeah, but their consciousness is what you want. Like when you're expressing your value. So when you're like, I am a conscious being and I self-associate in terms of language with another creature, in terms of identity. That's so that you could function and use words. But the actual foundation of those words, the ontological foundation, whether they're actually working correctly, is based upon the judgment of every individual from which those words, those universal concepts actually apply to. All moral patients. So that you've got your moral agents who are constructing universal concepts so that they can actually try and achieve some sort of good in their life, so that they can come to conclusions about value and actually achieve them. So like, I want a yacht. Oh, wait a minute, will this yacht actually bring me value? Well, will it bring me pleasure? And, understanding this exponentially creates an understanding of value. And that value, let's say in this case, you're boiling it down to pleasure. Then you would say, well, what is valuable in and of itself is pleasure. It's not your pleasure, it's pleasure. That's the only reason that it can be applied to you, an individuation of a collective consciousness.
I would, maybe all that you said is true, but I still don't see why I could not say meat is pleasurable for me. I know the meat is very pleasurable for me. I had meat many times. And I have no reason to not expect that meat will be pleasurable for me in the next point in time that I eat meat. So I don't see the reason why I shouldn't eat meat.
Okay, so when you say that, like, when we talk about, let's say, like your expression of, let's say, your goal, why would we say that your goal was more valuable than somebody else's goal, like, or more, like in other words, more justified than somebody else's? It isn't. Okay, so why should you choose to endorse, let's say, your drive towards pleasure over, let's say, altruistically choosing somebody else's?
Well, I will not use can, but I only do things because I want to, because they bring me pleasure, or they reduce discomfort. So that is how I operate, and that is, as you said, pleasure is valuable, and it's how I get value, by having
I
pleasure.
think there's like the fundamental difference of what we think I pertains to here. So when you say I just mean you mean like the individual,
Yes,
the
me as
individuated
Conan
conscious.
Barbarin.
But like that's just like the other thing when I would also equally pertain to every other individual.
No, it wouldn't. I'm
Yes.
well. When you have sex, I have no feeling. I receive no
So
pleasure
you're
from
talking about
it.
individual consciousness, but when we're talking about judgments, I'd say that we're using universals.
I don't see the point of using universals because I don't have pleasure when you have sex, right? So what do you care? What do I care if you have sex or not?
It's not about like so when you say like why do I care about what you do? It's about the notion of care, the notion of value. All of these points of judgment are based around bringing some sort of value experience, and your
Yes,
understanding of
value experience to me.
is, but even to you, is in relation to a shared value, a notion of value.
No,
Yes,
pleasure is electrochemical stimulus. Yes, yes. And I only feel my electrochemical stimulus. Yes,
what?
yes.
No, it's not.
Yes,
And
it
two,
is.
no, it's not. That's
Yes, it
physicalism.
is. Well,
Okay.
if it is physicalism, it is completely true. That is
Okay.
how I
Like you could, like, do
get.
you want to try and defend physicalism?
Well, I don't know what physicalism is. I never
Or like
heard
you're just like
said
materialism.
that,
Like you,
but it is absolutely true that
I mean,
everything that I am is a
Hume.
chemical
Right?
electrical reaction, right?
I mean, you know Hume, don't you? The philosophy of Hume.
No.
So, like, you know, when you talk about the Isord gap, that was David Hume.
Oh
So,
yeah.
yeah, what he also talked about there was like the relation um of a priori and synthetic concepts, right? So, like, why you think, let's say you're a purely physical organism, right? And the response, the point is that if you rely purely on, let's say, a notion of particularized empirical reality, which is like you believe reality is actually construed from event relationships and completely external to the agent. So a realm of facts, what he calls the matter of fact, and then you would have your relations of ideas, which is drawn from observation. If you believe that science works like that, then and because like let's say the world is purely material, the way that we understand the world is based off an observation through sense organs, which allows us to construct, let's say, like relationships of ideas. Then what you end up with is what's called Hume's fork, where all of the concepts that actually are supposed to pertain to reality don't necessarily relate to reality. I see one billiard ball strike another billiard ball, but I do not see a third term between them. So he sees one event and he says another event, but there's no reason to apply a causal connection between two events, which means that, like, at the end of the day, if you accept this, things like Newton's laws of physics, which he was arguing really against at the time, have no real way of obtaining reality. So when we're trying to understand, let's say, a scientific approach to the world, you're going to have to assume some form of, at least, transcendental idealism. You're going to have to assume that there is that actually the physical explanation of your mind is post actually the construction of causation by your mind, which is Kant's argument against Hume. So that's why physicalism, empiricism, and so on is just bad philosophy.
Yeah, I'm not. I don't care about philosophy.
Well, it does matter. I mean, in terms of the ability to gain knowledge and even justify science, be a good scientist.
Well, I'm economist. We don't deal with these kinds of things, but I would
Just
like.
do whatever.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go back to.
I mean, the point of what I'm making here is in terms of like how you understand yourself is vitally important to how you try to express your desires. So if you're understanding yourself, let's say, in a way which is like ungrounded and doesn't actually express your desires in a correct way, then you end up, let's say you're in a false consciousness, then you express desires in a way which may cause like it's like, look at it like this, right? if in terms of economics, right? If you were to, let's say, look at any market and you were to think, okay, well, the market equilibrium for this product is at like price point X, right? But so you see the number of buyers and number of sellers, and so you believe that, let's say, there is you believe that, let's say, you can, I'm trying to put this in a way that actually makes sense to me, never mind like to you. Let's say you believe that you could sell a product in on the market for like £12, but in reality, you would actually get you'd make more profit because of, let's say, the elasticity of let's say demand diminishing. You'd actually be better at, let's say, £11, and let's say because of other like competitive products. So people would be more likely to buy your product at £11 than £12. But because of your market analysis, you believe it's £12, and so you wrongly price your product. You would end up with a net loss, and that would be objectively verifiable, even though the system is in and of itself built off, let's say, subjective preferences in terms of economics, right? Which is why, like, economics tries to like kind of gauge these things. So you could say like, okay, well, economics being what it is, and understanding the way that the laws of supply and demand and so on like actually function, then what we can get from this is that you should, if you want to achieve your goal, price your product at £11 if the goal is profit, right? So that's the same thing with ethics in this respect.
Well,
If
without changing the market, there is always optimal points of sale. But so I don't understand what you are now describing. I think you're
I'm just saying, like, in terms of your market analysis, if you take that as self-analysis in ethics.
Well, if I do a better analysis of the market, then I do the better analysis of the market, sales, things, and every other analysis in the world. But I don't see how this has to do with anything.
So this is what I'm saying. Like, in terms of self-analysis, every time that we engage in some sort of preferential behavior in trying to achieve some sort of end, we've proposed that end in relation to an experience we believe that we are going to express. We're trying to express our freedom, no matter what goal it is that we try to achieve. We are driven towards. We're being driven towards a goal that we believe to be valuable. Now, whether it is going to be valuable or not is dependent upon our self-knowledge. Whether that goal actually expresses the value within our drives, like whether we are, like, for example, Plato says it like this: is the fool free when he gets what he wants? Basically showing that what he wants...
Yes, he is free when he gets what he wants.
I would completely disagree.
Well, the freedom is the ability to have independent action. That is what freedom is. And so if you get what you want,
independent action. Yeah. So what would you define as independent action?
Well, from my knowledge, that is a standard definition of the freedom, ability to act independently.
So, like, even if we were to say it was, I'm saying, what would you define as independent action?
Action that I'm able to pull off.
So, action that you're able to perform. So let's say like an act of volition.
Act of volition is can you use a different words, please?
So like one second, I'll try and find a word that like maybe a little bit like I don't know, like a choice or something which, so an action from which you would point towards and say, I chose that. That would you say that would be what you mean?
How do you mean I chose that? Yes, well, all actions that I perform that are voluntary actions, I choose to perform. So
if someone, let's say, puts a gun to your head and says, if you don't, let's say, I don't know, give me all the money that you have in your pockets,
That would be a voluntary action for me giving
You
him
would
the
say that
money.
would be voluntary as well.
Yes, of course. He can
Okay.
only tip the balance of my calculation. Would I give him money or not? But he cannot force me to give it.
I would disagree. I would say that would be coercion.
So
I would say that your free action would not have been the same as that coerced action. So that's not actually what you wanted to do. His will has exerted.
No, that would be what I want to do at this point, right? It is not maybe not my highest preferences overall, but in that moment, it is my preference to do.
This is on set now. Let's see if I can. There's actually a point in this book where I think they talk about this. It's actually a really good book on freedom. So, like, basically, in terms of this, I think like the author of this book, David Rose, really good, points out three models of how we can understand intention in this respect. The one that you've described is what would be known as empirical. What you want is simply determined by your behavior. So, like, whatever you do is what you want, but it doesn't explain necessarily.
What you do is what you wanted.
Yeah, okay, but it doesn't explain your reasons and motivations for action.
No, that would go a step further deeper into my psyche, yes.
So what you would actually, so like when you turn and you'd say like, well, I didn't want, so if someone was to say, I didn't want to give him the money, he made me do it, right?
Well, that would be inaccurate description of the situation, I believe.
Why?
Well, I would say he persuaded me violently to give him the money. That would be more accurate description of the event.
I mean, that is a description of the event, and I would agree with.
It would be more accurate, I believe.
I would say, you see, I don't, because I'd say when in terms of like when we talk about what I want, what is valuable, what I've actually determined to be valuable, and the judgment I'm making, I'm really saying in that point of coercion that he is forcing his judgment to take precedence over mine through violent action, right? So like the point, like to even understand why he would do that, we would have to understand what he wants of me and what I want of myself, and why he is violating what I want of myself. So we'd have to talk about second order desires. So we've got first order desires, whatever
It's irrelevant for him what you want.
It isn't. That's why he's put a gun to your head. Clearly, it is relevant to him what you want.
Oh, actually, well, he wants money. He wants money, so he wants to persuade you to, let's say, open the safe to be easier to picture the situation.
But, I mean,
he wants you to change your mind and open the safe.
Yeah. So he wants something he wants you to make a judgment, and you want him to, let's say, not act coercively.
To not kill you. You want him to not kill you. Because you value your life more than the money in the safe.
I agree. And then, but you could say that there is a value beneath that. It's like you would rather him go away altogether. Like these are the.
Yes, of course you would rather that, but that's not the option. So it's mute upon the world.
Well, it's not. It's important in terms of how we're making decisions in the first place, because some people will actually just say, "I'll take the bullet, thanks." So
and if they value money or spite rather than
right, like it could
that's okay.
It could be like a moral decision. You might think that you're performing.
I would not classify any of what we talked yet as moral decisions.
I don't know how. Anyway, so like the point of what I'm trying to it's like look at it like this: if an individual gets what they want, but what actually makes something desirable is not present, then they did not actually get like what they want. So if they get a first order desire, right, which is any given desire, but then upon evaluation they realize this was actually not desirable, then they did
fucked up.
Yeah, they did. In terms of self-knowledge.
So they fucked up. That's their problem.
That moral inquiry was wrong because they had a misunderstanding of what they were, of what was desirable. They misunderstood what was going on in the world. So, like, the notion of freedom you're talking about would be like a Hobbesian notion of freedom. right?
I don't know who Hobbes is. I don't give a shit. But wait, when you say morality, you only
So
describe what people and why people want what they want and why they do what they do.
Hobbes basically says that
Yeah. I don't give what
basically
shit what
says that we
Hobbes
are
says.
always
Look,
well. You don't
look.
give it. Look. I'll just kick you. It's fine. Look, like at the end of the day, like the reason that Hobbes says that, like in terms of, he says we are always want what we want, right? It's you always like he basically says almost the exact same. Like, oh, if someone puts a gun to your head, they've actually just reordered your desires, and so the number one desire always wins out, right? And so he points he points that which is desirable to be the achievement of the strongest first order desire, right?
Yes, I would agree with that.
You see, but then you are entirely caused by something else. So his notion of being free can be entirely causal, right? You are free when you get what you want, but what you want might not necessarily actually be what you actually want. It could be what somebody else wants.
It is what you want at every given moment. Yes.
No. See, this
How
is the
no?
point.
If
So
you
this,
if
so I'm
in
trying
that
to explain,
moment what you
I'm
want the
trying-
most is what you do.
so I'm trying to explain, like what we do, what classify as what is actually desirable by you, what would be the expression of your freedom, is not necessarily your attainment of any given goal, but rather the attainment of value itself, of the expression of what we would consider your freedom. So if it's what you want and not what the robber wants.
Look, freedom is and wants and preferences are different. Freedoms is ability to have independent action, right? So it is ability to do something. It's not to want something.
When we're talking about in terms of, let's say, choices, independent action, you'd say like, if let's say, have you ever heard of the analogy where, let's say, there's an assassin, like there's an assassin, right?
Okay.
And he gets hired to kill someone, and then at the point when he's going to shoot the gun, he has an involuntary muscle spasm.
Well,
right?
that is involuntary action.
Okay, it's involuntary, so he didn't do it. Right?
Yes.
So what does it mean to make an act of volition?
Volition. I would have to look up the meaning of that word.
It's a free choice. Like what is a free choice?
Oh, free choice. I never dealt much with free choice arguments.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, like, this is basically what I'm asking. Like, what does it mean to make a choice that was like actually your own?
Well, I would say that it is to make your own choices, to do some voluntary action.
Okay, but then that's just a tautology, isn't it? That's like a free choice is a free choice.
Well, that's how we do things. A rock is a rock, right? We named it rock because we say, oh, this is a thing in the universe.
I'm asking you to mean by
name to convey information about it, and we will name it rock.
Yeah, but I'm asking what you mean by a free choice. What do you mean?
Free choice is a voluntary action. Voluntary action is those actions which are under the effect, which are under control of our will. Some actions are under control of our will, and some are not.
Okay, so something being under the control of your will. Okay, fair enough. So if we were to say, like, if you were to will an action, but be totally deluded of the consequences. So let's say your will was to create a world which was better than another world, but it actually made one that was worse in terms of your evaluation.
Of my value.
Just in terms of experience. Like, you just experience it worse. So, like, your idea was to create pleasure, but you've actually created pain, right? So, like, you wanted to have the pleasure of climbing up of a rock face. You thought it would be more exhilarating and more pleasurable again if you didn't take a harness, but then you slip, fall off, and die, or you slip, fall off, and hurt yourself severely, right? Like, you could say that your evaluation of the situation was wrong, and that led you to make a mistake, right?
Yes.
Okay, so this is why self-knowledge in this respect would be just as important, right? Let's say you didn't actually like the exhilaration of climbing without a harness, and that was just a mistake. You don't actually like that. Or what if you, so when you construct a desire, the reasoning that you use to construct the desire was actually coercively, like let's say the words that you use. This would be like the Nietzschean argument against, or like probably against most of like my position, would be like, what if the words we engage with are actually produced by an unfair power dynamic, so that our notions of value, like say good, bad, right, wrong, pleasure, pain, notions of value are actually representative of only a certain class of individuals who value these things and we do not. So our very thinking at an ideological level is being manipulated by a power structure, right? Would you say you are free then if you've been brainwashed, essentially?
Yes.
Why would you? If it's your will, how do you know it's your will? What makes it yours and not somebody else's?
It is a physical action that I performed under my own will, right? If, let's say, you cannot say that. Okay, let's always go to everybody's favorite topic, Nazis. Let's say I was brainwashed by a Nazi to kill Jews. It is my voluntary action to pull the trigger, right? I did that of my own free will. Just because somebody told me that Jews are evil, Jews are this, Jews are that, that is, at the end of the day, irrelevant. What is relevant is that I pulled the trigger.
You're missing the reason.
That is voluntary action, right?
You think of voluntary action simply as the movement of, let's say, like essentially triggering motor neurons, when it's actually more to do with your reasoning behind the action. Like your choices, your judgments, whether they're actually being reason or they're being caused by something else. This is why someone like Sartre would say that freedom is the rejection of other forms of causation. So, like, if in terms of language, he would see language, culture as imposing upon me and trying to convince me of goals which are not my own. Which is why you'd say, actually, no, that's not my goal. Like, that's not my preference.
Yes, people all the time try to change your priorities, right? We talked about that before.
But this is the thing. Like, so if you're talking about, like, what actually is your goal, what actually is your priority, what you actually are trying to achieve, and you're trying to work this out, you're trying to act freely.
At that moment, I'm trying to kill the Jew, right?
I think, like, no, but this is the thing. Let's say you're trying to kill the Jew. Right, and you believe that killing the Jew is actually a good thing, but you've been like brainwashed to believe that it's a good thing, but it's a bad thing. Then you are an instrument of someone else. Your action is not your own; it's somebody else's. You just didn't know it.
How is it somebody else's when I'm pulling the trigger? It's mine.
Because even if you made the decision, your decision was made for you by someone else.
No, it wasn't. I myself came with all the people, with all available knowledge to me. Yeah, and some of that knowledge might be imposed.
2 + 2 = 5.
Please, let me talk a bit.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, so I take all the knowledge, I take all the calculations that are available to me, and I make a decision. If somebody says Jews are evil, they're destroying the Reich, and if I value Reich, and somebody says that Jews are destroying it, I might choose to get rid of the Jew, right? But that is my action. You may say that somebody provided me with false information, but that is irrelevant in my thinking process. My thinking process is I take all the information that is available to me, and I make decision which is most in line with my preferences, which I believe that will give me the most pleasure.
No, but this is the thing. Like, when you're saying it's in line with your preferences, your understanding of your preferences are being construed by language that is being produced by someone else.
That is possible, but that is still that would mean that somebody is giving me new or different preferences.
Like, if I put you in front of a maths question, right? That's just 2 + 2, and I'm like, oh yeah, but before you go in, I say 2 + 2 = 5. or I tell you that a plus sign is a different logical relation. Like I tell you that plus means minus. You're always going to get the wrong answer.
Yes.
I've determined your answer for you before you've went in. That's the point. It's psychological coercion. So like this is why when we talk about causation and talking about freedom, if you say your will, you'd have to be able to say that it is specifically, uniquely,
no, well, if you
decision made by you.
No, if you say that plus or you say that 4 is not written as 4, it is written as 5, and I go on a math test and I put 5 other than 4, this is simply a problem of communication and use of collective signs. That does not mean that it is not my preference to answer the question. I answered the question as I was taught.
The point is that like in terms of any logical deductive, in any form of rational deductive inference, right? Like it's any syllogistic argument, anything like that. If I've manipulated the words that you are using,
well, you are not manipulating the words. In this case, what you are doing is you are manipulating the signs.
Wait a minute. Listen to what I'm saying. Like if let's say I manipulated the words you're using, your understanding, I'm manipulating your understanding in that respect. I've taught you a way of being and a way of thinking, which understands your preferences themselves. Then your attempt to express your preferences will be you expressing my preferences.
Okay, let's say it like this. Instead of me wanting to kill the Jew, I want to cure the Jew. And you said by pulling the trigger, you will cure the Jew. Okay? And what I do is I take all the information that is available to me, and again, I do what is my highest preference. My highest preference is to heal the Jew, so I will pull the trigger and try to kill the Jew. Just because it will kill the Jew, it does not mean that you impose your preference onto me, because my preference was my preference still. You simply deceive me.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I've deceived. But this is what deception ultimately does. This is what power is. Okay, like so if we're talking about like power over other individuals, like this is what like if you were to say like whose will is being expressed and why is it theirs, then there has to be something that can be pointed to and say like actually this is their preference, which means it ontologically relates to their desire. Like and their drive, that it's actually expressing their drive. But if I've managed to create you so that you sublimate, that means you express your drives in such a way as to express my drives instead, then you're not free every time you act.
Of course I'm free. I'm free to disregard your preferences if I want, but I don't want to, because I find your argument, let's say, compelling. That is what we are doing right here, right now.
It's prior to argumentation in this, right? It's like genuinely at the point of the categories of understanding itself, like how we differentiate and create determinate understandings of reality, like even like how we objectify the world. If it's based upon my notion of what is valuable, then your notion of how to express your value is actually going to be my value expressed through you. The words you use, the concepts you apply to your life, the specific mental abilities which allow you to make decisions within your life are going to express my will, not yours.
Oh my God. Okay, so again, I disagree with your notions, and can we go on veganism now? We are talking for over an hour.
Yeah, well,
and
until you
yet to touch the veganism.
Yeah, because like, I mean, entirely honest with you, like if I'm going to be incredibly honest with you, your understanding of ethics is non-existent, right?
Yes, of course. I don't give a shit about ethics.
Ethics. So if I'm really like, all right, well, okay, my understanding of the world is physically causative, and then I have to give you a brief explanation of why Hume shows that to be essentially lead to an issue with self-understanding, which then Kant has to counteract with in terms of transcendental idealism. And then I'm going to have to give you a lecture on what, like Hegel and how
No, you don't need to give me any lectures.
You know what I mean? Like, what the fuck am I? Yeah, well, that's the problem, man. Like, if you're going to understand the world in the most basic, rudimentary way, so when we engage in ethics, I've got to give you a lecture that's going to be like 2 hours long, and then you go, why did I have to have that 2 hour long lecture? It's
No.
because you needed to go and do 2 hours of fucking research before the debate.
Look, again, okay, let's go to a very simple argument. Let's stupefy my argument down to the most basic form. What would happen to me if I kill an animal and eat it? Nothing. Nothing will happen to me.
Something will
There
happen
is
to
no
you.
reason. Well, nothing undesirable will happen to me
How do you know that?
from experience. Nothing ever undesirable happened to me when I
Okay, how
ate
do you
meat.
understand your experience?
Sorry?
This is essentially how. This is like Hume's folk, right? So it's like, how do you understand? If you're saying that, all right, all knowledge is based off induction, I understand it because of induction, past like constantly conjoined experience, right? This ends up leading to the point in which all knowledge of like future predictions is impossible. So you can't prove that it actually will. Like you can't prove causation through this.
Well, I cannot prove that something. I cannot be 100% certain that nothing will happen to me, but I can be certain to a reasonable enough degree, and that is good enough for me. There is nothing that will happen to me if I kill the animal, so I don't see. It will give me pressure, so I don't see why I should not do it.
The rationality itself is. Like, the point is like even in terms of probability, your understanding of the probability is based off only those experiences you've had and your memory of those experiences you've had, and it's all assumed. So all of it is an assumption, right?
Okay.
This is just going to lead straight to absurdity, which is why why Kant came along and showed that actually even for you to assume, even for you to understand the events themselves, even understand what the objects are, to understand like basic rudimentary notions of space, time, causation.
Wait, so you disagree that nothing will happen to me if I go to the supermarket and buy a piece of
Saying
meat?
that your reasoning itself is wrong.
Okay, so is that yes or no? Will something bad happen to me or something bad will not happen to me?
Okay, I think something bad will happen to you.
What?
Okay, I think that you will have made an error in judgment about what is valuable, and so be expressing valuable, which is value which is negative to you.
How?
Because what you are is a collective mind.
I reject that notion.
Why?
Because I'm not.
Because you're not. Why are you not?
I don't know. But I don't feel as part of a collective
no,
notion.
I think you are. And I've got no.
So when you say that something so we're trying to say that you are trying to say that I don't get value from meat.
No, you don't get value from meat. No.
Okay, so why do I crave it and why do I eat it and why do I enjoy eating it?
Because you're living in a false consciousness. You misunderstand yourself.
I misunderstand myself how?
You apply a concept of empiricism and physicalism and understand yourself as a purely materialistic object, trying to achieve, let's say, basic sense pleasure.
Yes.
Rather than understanding why pleasure is even, why you even consider pleasure valuable in terms of how the word is formed. And
value is pleasurable because it is incentive given to me through evolution to keep at some
so you're
activity, right?
As I said, you're assuming like a materialistic, physicalistic understanding of the self, which is incorrect.
Well, you can say that this is incorrect. I think it is completely adequate explanation of my actions.
But the reason why it isn't is because it essentially is shown to be non-causative by, or non-explanatory by, let's say, a Humean position. So Hume basically comes along and shows, oh well, basically all these notions of concepts can't actually be derived from experience, and so they're fabrications produced by the imagination. And so that's what I think you are in terms of your explanation of yourself. It's just a fabrication. It's a fiction.
Well, I cannot see how a real world is fictional. I cannot see how chemistry, on
I believe
physics
in
is
chemistry.
frictional.
I believe in chemistry and physics and so on. I just think that you don't understand them.
How can I understand them? I have chemical reactions when I eat the meat, and and that chemical reaction causes me to have chemical and electronical stimuli, which my brain interprets as positive.
Yeah. So like you can say that like there is a positive experience alongside, let's say, a dopamine response, but that doesn't mean
Yes.
it's reducible to the dopamine response.
Sorry, I missed the last word before the
It doesn't mean
dopamine.
it's reducible to the dopamine response.
Sorry again, I was pressing the play
So
button.
how do you think that we understand that dopamine produces pleasure?
Well, I presume that we tested it
How do you think we tested it?
by giving dopamine to subjects.
It wouldn't have been like that, but it would have been, let's say, the induction of dopamine in a subject. Why? How would we have known that? Let's say, how would we have gauged whether that produced pleasure?
Well, we can either, well, at the end of the day, we'll probably ask somebody.
1 second, someone's trying to say something. Sorry, someone's trying to make me,
No problem.
trying to ask this question now. Okay, so sorry, where were we? All right, yes. Yeah, so how would one know dopamine was valuable? So you would basically, you would have to. What they did is essentially they do tests to find out whether people relate pleasure responses to dopamine. So the way that you find out it is valuable is did you feel value there?
Yes.
So you wouldn't say that dopamine is necessarily causative. You couldn't go dopamine causes value. You just say like, okay, dopamine coincides value.
Well,
Do you see what?
I would say that this is a purely philosophical difference. Dopamine stimulates certain regions of the brain, which produce certain stimuli which people find desirable. I think that is completely true for an adequate explanation.
It's like, have you ever seen gambling before? Like, so gamblers, like they get, like they can desire something which is, like, so if let's say you take a gambler, they desire something which is, they desire the anticipation of like the thrill. They're getting off on the thrill, which is like the release of, which is the release of dopamine essentially in their brain, and that coincides. But like the reason the dopamine is released is because of their anticipation of risk, and the reason that they are valuing that risk is based off like a psychological process. Let's say how they've been raised. Let's say they're engaged in risky behaviors because of I don't know. Let's say it's something like they've had a controlling childhood or something like that, and so they seek to have essentially take risks as a way of expressing their desires. And that's how they've learned to essentially cope with being controlled. They're getting off on the restriction, and they take risks with themselves and others. Now, the way that we would understand that, like, the reason that dopamine's even being conceived of as valuable in the first place is the value ascribed by the individual. The reason it's being released is because of the individual's action. There's none of this is incompatible with physical objects in the world. Like, I don't deny that part of what I am is physical, but whether I can be reduced to a physical understanding of self is the problem. Because if I have to give what is a mental explanation, if I have to say I mentally experience value, but value itself is supposed to be derivative from a physical chemical response, then the problem is essentially the association of value with the chemical.
Yes,
Like,
I would definitely say that you need to use a language to transfer information of what you are feeling to another. That is how we transfer information, right? And that is how we agree on the terms of the language, on the words and their meaning, so we can transfer information.
it's a metaphysical point. So what the point I'm trying to make is like how we understand what a thing is, understanding reality. It's like the point that this is why I was trying to give you an explanation of Kant before, because the categories of understanding, let's say space, time, all of these notions are actually imposed by a mind and don't exist until a mind has actually imposed these concepts. Like there is
Yes,
no
of course, the words don't exist without the
no,
mind.
not words. The thing, the actual relationships between objects do not exist until a mind is actually applying these notions. Like what makes an object determined?
What sorts of relationship? I don't understand what you are saying.
Space, time, causation.
Okay, so space times causation, and what does has to
You
do?
can't get these from empirical analysis.
Of course I do.
No, you don't.
If I add water to acid, I will have a reaction.
Yes,
and
you would.
there
In
is
what
a
reaction?
and I can conclude the correlation that the reaction was produced by me pouring water into the acid.
Okay, so let's take that. So every time you pour water into, well, let's say you take alkaline, you pour an alkaline into acid, and you get a chemical reaction, right? Every time you do it,
Yes.
right? Okay, and so through constant conjunction, you come to understand that event A will lead to event B, right?
Yes.
Event A will cause event B. And so you keep doing it over and over again. And through constant conjunction, over and over again, you recognize that this is reinforced and this is what you believe probabilistically will occur. See, now what Kant's arguing is that for you even to see event A and event B as temporally connected and associated was an operation by mind. That there is a constant stream of consciousness from which you're associating event A and event B.
Yes, I agree. There is a process of the mind, and of course, every process of the mind is electrochemical.
Before we get on to whether it is chemical or not.
Well, electrochemical. It is either electrochemical, either chemical or pure
Yeah,
electric.
I'm not going to make that assumption just yet. But the thing is that let's say we were to say that it's caused from event A to event B is how we understand these objects' association, and that temporal stream is actually a concept, a category applied by mind, namely time. Now, another one would be, let's say, space. Like why I interpret, let's say, one object as separate from another would be the application of space, where I've gave a determinate identity to one thing and another. So I say that's one, that's two, and how they relate would be essentially an application of my mind. I mean, at the point of pure intuition, I have to be able to see the one and two. I have to be able to identify a distinction between objects in terms of space. Right?
Yeah, so
all of this, like space, time, causation in this respect, as in the constant conjunction of things through space and time, have always been produced by my mind. And so fundamentally at the bottom...
Yes, your mind is a simple biological computer made with electric...
the epistemological bottom isn't the conclusion that I reach from... the epistemological, the metaphysical bottom isn't the conclusion that I reach from doing science and analyzing the brain. It's prior to me doing science. It's how I engaged in epistemology and metaphysics in the first place. It's in my intuitions. And this is what science relies upon. Otherwise, things like experimentation wouldn't work. You see what I'm saying? So when we're physically reductive, we're relying upon concepts which cannot be reduced to physicality and have to be reduced to an ideality, a mental realm.
Well, because something that is, you can say anything that is not corporeal could be into the realm of the mind. But I think that even if you say that, then yeah, okay, that is true. But I don't see how pointing that out is, especially in such a colluded way, is in any way beneficial to
Because in
particularly
this case, it
conversation.
shows why I would say, like, in terms of like when we're talking about things like dopamine being positive, we already have to associate prior experiences within the mind with our analysis of a brain and then infer or assume a causal link. We say that dopamine causes pleasure rather than the mutual. Um,
Okay, so does dopamine cause pleasure?
I'd say that dopamine is
Yes or no?
no.
No.
No. I mean, it has a cause. It has a relationship with pleasure, but I don't think that it necessarily causes pleasure.
Okay, this is not what I usually hear. Usually people agree that physical stimuli produce pleasure.
I'm not a physicalist, so I would say that like most people are usually arguing from a physicalist
Well, I would
base.
think that you are that you are
An idealist.
I would not use the word idealist, but I would
No,
use a word.
that would be the philosophical term of what I am. I'm an idealist.
Okay, I would use a different word, which I will not say here, but it comes down to the point that you can say that I have different wish other than to eat an animal, and I would say how you can know my wish, and even if I mean, how can you know that that is not my wish? Because I'm sure it is. You can say that is not what you really want, but I don't know how you can know what I really want. You are not me.
Because your understanding of self can only be derived from universal concepts, which are then individually applied.
So you know something about me that I don't.
Yeah.
Oh, that's very. What's the word? Arrogant.
It's not arrogant. I actually studied philosophy, and I'll just say you don't understand yourself.
Well,
like a psychologist probably knows a lot about me that I don't. Like, come on, man. Like for shit, my girlfriend, you probably know more about me than I know about myself, right? In some respects, you know, people know more about each other all the time. So I don't know what's arguing about that.
I would certainly disagree with that notion. I would certainly say that I know that my wish is to eat an animal. And
you know your beliefs, let's say. So you could have, let's say you have sure knowledge of your beliefs, which is even contestable in terms of psychology.
Okay.
So like even in terms of like a psychoanalytic approach, I could say that you're lying to yourself. So like you could say that like you actually have a false belief about your beliefs.
Okay,
you
so billions of people who go into the store and eat meat have no idea of what they really want.
Yeah, they're all wrong.
Okay, they are all wrong, and don't you think that it is very strange for you to say that
No.
That people who do what they think they want is not what they really want. I know what people really want.
I would actually make the argument that all of us are absolutely incapable of knowing with certainty what we really want.
Well, if we are unavailable to say what we really want, how can you claim what I really want?
I'd say that there is let's say like a curve in terms of truth, in terms of how much we can show what we actually do want.
Okay, so you extrapolate. So you extrapolate with certain degree of precision what I want.
But yeah, so it's like I think that I have a better understanding of the self than the average individual, which is what I just said.
That I fall outside of that percentage of your certainty.
What you think? No. So what you saying that you fall outside of the percentage of my certainty?
I am 90% sure that I know what you really want, and I tell you, okay, I'm that 10%.
Okay, I'd say why?
Because that is what I really want. I really want.
And how do you know that?
I get from. How do I know that?
Yes.
Well, I have no good explanation other than that is what I want.
Okay, you have no good explanation.
Yeah, how do I need to explain my wants, every single of my wants? I also do I need to explain my want to have another breath of air?
Well, I mean, most of the time that's automated, right? But
Well,
I would say like you could probably put that in terms in which I would understand, right? And then you'd make arguments in relation about
well,
why you should avoid pain
most
and
people understand when I say I want to meat because meat gives me pleasure, and they understand that meat gives me pleasure because
okay, but
from
then
their
it's
past
like whether
experience,
pleasure
eating
it's like
meat was pleasurable.
okay, but then you can understand like that's like even looking in most basic terms. If pleasure if pleasure itself was the standard of what we of the judgment, then that which brings you the most pleasure would be the action that you would always do, yeah?
The action that I perceive to give me most pleasure would be the action I will do
Okay, so even like so even the
if I'm able to do it, of
realize
course.
that you might be wrong, and so the only way that you could understand whether you're going to be right or not is to gain self-understanding, and the only way to gain self-understanding in terms of an
Well, or to
understanding
try.
of you is to self-associate in terms of mutual recognition between multiple agents, which gives you an understanding of a universal substance, the
Yes,
self.
or I can go through with the action and see the results. If I find results agreeable, I will try to repeat the action. If I
Yeah.
found results
Okay.
unappealing, then I will not try
Like,
repeat the
okay,
action. Right?
you can do that, but that doesn't mean you are actually right. It's like look, if I was to do if I was to do like if I was to try and generate a universal principle from let's say 5 experiments, but each one of those experiments was done in such a way as the results were skewed and I wasn't controlling for the environment, you'd be like, well, that's bad science. You're actually not creating universal laws here.
Well, of
So in
course I'm not.
same
I'm just,
preferences,
I,
it's exactly the same.
yeah, I'm doing preferences. I believe that this piece of meat will be pleasurable for me to eat. It may be, I don't
You
know,
understand like what
bad, and I could have a stomach ache,
you can
and
understand.
this could. Please let me speak a bit. You've spoken quite a lot.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
this can be displeasure for me. Now, next time I will try to do a better job and picking my meats. Yes, yes. So,
Well,
uh,
no,
uh,
this is the point. Like, let's say, like, even if you assume that, and then, like, let's say, like, even trying to do a better job, you keep doing a worse job, but you keep thinking you're doing a better job. There has to be a notion of like, of methodological analysis. Otherwise, you're essentially just, you could be going back down a path of self-destruction just as much as you're going down a path of
yes,
self.
I could have gone down the path of
Yeah,
self-destruction.
and the only way you're going to be able to do that is ethics. That's what ethics is about.
Well, I would say that you can agree that that is what ethics is about. I don't care about it. I don't. That is not how I
Right.
usually describe
Well,
ethics,
look,
because at the end of the
you
day,
will care about
people
it.
don't
You just
care
don't
about
care about
ethics
it.
in such way, and that is the way that was. Uh, that is the way of the ethics which is unapplicable to the most situation in the everyday life. So
But
this
you're going to
definition of
experience
ethics is
negativity, whether you like it or not.
well, yeah. I will describe. I will probably go experience some negative
Or like
consequences of my
bad
actions. Yes.
decisions have bad outcomes. Those
Well,
outcomes you will have.
some actions, even if I perceive for them to have a desirable outcome, turn out to be undesirable outcome. Nothing can be certain in life, so not even my prediction can be certain.
No, but you can get like more probabilistic in terms of truth and what
How
it's actually going to, how you would do it in
yes,
terms of.
you say that
Analysis.
I can do that by knowing my true wants, right?
Yeah, I would say that would be through
Yeah,
hermeneutic
and
analysis, which is why
I
I pointed out
myself,
before, which
I
is why I
myself
pointed
may
out before, in
just
terms of understanding the self, the most efficient way of understanding the self would be hermeneutics and not empirics. So you're looking at it in terms of, let's say, I'm going to commit action A and action B and action C over and over again, and hopefully I'll come to some sort of notion, true notion. I'm saying that one, that will only give partial knowledge, and it's based on a limited amount of information. You would be far more rational to instead engage in hermeneutics than in empirics.
okay. What is hermeneutics or whatever?
So hermeneutics would be like so where empiricism is looking at event A and looking for constant conjunction, hermeneutics would be the application of a universal concept, monitoring its application, and then analyzing it, and then changing the universal concept, applying it, analyzing it, changing it, and then it's the hermeneutic circle. That's how I would. So when you look at how notions of the self, I would recommend looking at and even notions of freedom. Actually, shit, if you want, check out the book Free Will and Continental Philosophy, and Model 3 in terms of this is hermeneutics, which is, I would argue, the most appropriate method of self-analysis. That's why I'm saying, like, in terms of your approach, you're epistemologically flawed.
Well, it served me pretty well this far, but let me ask you a question. You see a piece of fruit, okay? You never saw this piece of fruit before. You never had this piece of fruit before. Nobody ever told you about the existence of this piece of fruit before. How would you know if you would eat it or not?
So you're saying, like, in terms of, like, so if I was to find a piece of fruit, and I know it's a piece of fruit.
Yeah, you saw it growing to a tree. You are pretty certain that it is a piece of fruit.
I'm saying that, so I'm applying, let's say, the word fruit to it, so I know it's fruit. So
yeah, it is a fruit of the tree, yes.
Okay. So then I would analyze it as best as I could. I would probably, like smell it and stuff like that, but I'd probably, taste it. If it depends on the scenario, obviously. If it's like a survival situation, I'm in the jungle or something, and I'm like, shit, I need to eat. There's this piece of fruit in front of me. Is this fruit edible? Then I would engage in some sort of like analysis. So I'd bite it, I'd taste it, I'd smell it, that kind of thing. In biting it, if I taste a sour taste, I would know that would be normally associated with higher risk endeavors, because I'm self-associated with other people who.
Yes, I would do absolutely the same thing. And if I find the fruit pleasurable, I would eat it again.
You see, I mean, like, I would say that even if I didn't find it pleasurable, I might do it again. It depends on.
Well,
like,
if you don't find it pleasurable, then you will not eat it again, right? Because it has no value for you.
That's not how that works. Like look, I can know my interest would be to necessarily consume something that I might. Let's say I don't like broccoli. I mean, I actually do like broccoli. Let's say I don't like broccoli, and let's say I wanted to make sure that I was healthy. I might eat broccoli regardless of the taste, because the value would be separate from the experience of eating the broccoli.
Well,
right?
yeah, but that would also be. It would also produce, okay, not maybe pleasure in the strictest definition of the word, but it would produce some sort of benefit for you.
Well, it's like smoking, isn't it? It's like you can understand smoking is self-destructive, even though that it's like might bring pleasure, but it might also kill you.
Yeah, that's why people smoke, because they want to.
They think it's in their interest.
Okay, so that is, as I said, my view is pretty descriptive. So that is that is why people smoke, because they want to smoke. That feels nice to them.
Say that there are people who could say they're irrational for wanting to do that.
Well, yeah, they can say they're irrational, but it doesn't really matter if they're irrational or not. It is if they do it or do they not do it, and why do they do it? I ask you, why do you smoke? I like the taste of tobacco, and I like to smoke. It makes me feel calm. Okay, that is a good enough. That is a good enough explanation.
The judgment isn't just on. Like, so, for example, there may be like that. The judgment, like, oh yeah, like I like to smoke, and who cares about what happens when I'm 80? But they might realize that they're going to be when I'm that 80, and then when they're 80, they'll be like, actually, I wish I'd cared.
Well, that's your problem when you are 80, right?
Yeah. No, but the point is that the value is experienced, like, regardless of the belief state. So there is always going to be the answer. Right, the answer is either going to actually, essentially align or disalign with your hypothesis, and so your ethical hypothesis and your notion of self, that psychological unity that goes through your whole life, your evaluation of smoking as a behavior is an evaluation of you through time and what will actually bring you value. So your method of understanding yourself is how you would gain knowledge, which would best give you the best ethical conclusions, which will align with the real world. That's why ethics is objective.
There is a notion in economics that a pound or whatever you want to use now is more valuable than 2 pounds later. Now, how much pounds later would be more valuable than a pound now is, well, it depends on the circumstances, but there is a notion that something that is now is worth more than something that will be later. Now, by which percentage you discount the later gains are, of course, subjective and depending on the circumstances, but you can point out that something that is now has more value than something that will come later. And you can say also the same. You can say that I, at this moment, value my smoking today more than I would value my discomfort later. Of course, you can become later and say, but I was mistaken, but you are, which you are now at 80, are not who you were at 30, right?
Maybe not. Well, I mean, yes, you are. Like in terms of a psychological continuity, you are the same person. Like,
yes, but you are the same person, but you still don't have the same ideas. You have the same experiences. You don't have any. And most of your cells are not even the same.
One of those is right and one of those is wrong in relation to the experience of value in your life.
Well, you say right and wrong. I don't like to use those terms.
Yeah, I know you don't because you misunderstand the self. But this is what I'm trying to say.
Yes, because a deeper understanding of self is not necessary to me.
The greater expression of your preferences, like trying to express your preferences to the greatest degree, as in freedom, is dependent upon self-knowledge. Which is why we went through this whole thing where I was like, in terms of that Hobbesian notion of freedom, it's actually not going to allow you to express your preferences necessarily the best way. You might express somebody else's preferences.
Well, I would say that it's maybe a shared preferences at the worst.
Shared preferences are how we solve this problem. Shared preferences are the ability to co-author the self, and that would be mutual psychological association from a universal notion of mind, which is why I would say animals are included in that. The expression of your value is actually expressible through universal value that is found in notions of law, in notions of obligation that we find in ethics. That's what it's about, the expression of your freedom, of our freedom.
Oh yes, I think we finally touched about what I wanted to talk from the beginning. So, what I think is the most important thing in all this conversation is that I don't believe that animals are part of the system in which actions upon them, which would be harmful, are punished. And they're not. And they never were punished. And I believe that it is down to our evolutionary path. I can go deeper, but I don't know how much you would be acceptive of that idea.
Let's just say that again. Let's see if I understood properly. So you're saying that essentially... Actually, no. Can you just reiterate that for my benefit there? Sorry.
Okay. So, if you go to, you probably won't accept this as a source, but there are many definitions of morality. And first, and two mains are descriptive morality and normative or prescriptive morality. I don't care about prescriptive morality. I don't think it is a very useful thing to do. Of course, you will disagree, but I would like to ask you to mute your disagreement for a moment. Descriptive morality often says that something as rules of behavior which are influenced by culture and a few different things, and which society enforces. I would argue that that is not completely true.
Descriptive morality doesn't necessarily do that. So you get descriptivists who actually don't describe, let's say, like evolutionary approaches to morality.
Yeah, of course, but I do. I think it is the most appropriate way to approach a subject, the most accurate one.
For example, like Shadow Stash, I debated him before. He's a descriptivist.
Yeah, I try to debate Shadow. Our mutual friend Zoom tried to set it up, but it never came to anything for yet. So yes, I approach this from the evolutionary standpoint. I believe that through couldn't explain why I came to this conclusion, but I don't think it's very relevant, especially to you, that we evolved something that is usually colloquially called moral instinct, something that we believe that inherently is, I don't want to use the words, I don't know, but something that hurts this instinct. That is mostly you doing damage to another or harm, or perceiving somebody doing damage to another. And I don't think that part of this process, animals will be part of this process, and I don't see any mechanism from which animals would be included into it, because you are actively encouraged by, you can say we are not, but I would say that you do, because animals are very easy source of, well, not easy, but very available source of high quality nutrients, and they
often being associated with one number one causes of death. But
well, yes, that is beside the point. Maybe they are now, and I'm not granting that they are now, but they were certainly not through a huge amount of evolutionary process of our species, right?
okay. So
there were no incentive for you not to do harm to an animal from I believe from a moral instinct, because you didn't have protection of morality from the animal, and you didn't really need protection from most animals.
I mean, eliminate the evolutionary process. Like if we're talking about this in purely evolutionary terms, we'd have to look at domestication and the social.
Yes, the domestication is simply keeping prey simply keeping prey confined. That is what domestication process is.
No,
and you are selectively breeding the most
dogs on prey.
Sorry?
For example, hunting dogs on prey.
Well, the dogs are the domestication of dogs is
social relationships with dogs.
Yes. Well, let me explain the dogs. Dogs
normally, people talk about this in terms of evolution. It's pro-social and anti-social behaviors, not necessarily a moral instinct, because that implies, like, well, actually, here's the thing: how would you define a moral instinct?
Okay, so there was a few questions there. So, what do you want me to answer first, the moral instinct or the dogs?
How do you define a moral instinct?
Okay, I think that moral instinct is the instinct which compels people to do actions which would prevent harm. Which prevents them from doing harm to others, and to punish those who do harm to others.
So it compels people to not do harm to others,
and that others be humans.
Well, I mean, why? Right?
I believe that it is a trait which was very beneficial in intergroup behavior. Okay, but it was beneficial to the individuals who had it, and through procreation, because they were more successful, those genes spread.
So it compels us not to hurt other people and to punish those who do. Yes. Are you describing empathy?
No, empathy is the ability to extrapolate the feelings of another.
No, I mean, like, well, empathy would not. I mean, like, well,
I'm not saying that empathy is not a prerequisite for the moral instinct, but they are separate things.
Okay, so what would you say was experienced as in terms of the compulsion? What is that compulsion experienced as by the individual?
As a discomfort when doing harm to another, and as a positive influence when punishing those who did harm to the others.
Okay, and so you would say that perhaps that they, in that respect, share a feeling with another. You'd be like, oh, well, they associate themselves negatively with the negative feelings of another.
I would say that that definitely empathy is prerequisite for the evolution of.
Yeah, that's empathy.
Well, no, empathy is ability to extrapolate the feelings of another. That does not necessarily need to lead to anything. A lot of animals have empathy.
I think you could argue that, like, well, I think that in terms of pro-social behaviors as well, like, there's a lot of social animals that would then also have the same quote-unquote moral instinct, right?
Yeah, but also you also need to have empathy towards your prey. You need to have empathy towards you are a mammal. You need to have empathy towards your young,
I
and
mean,
so on.
you don't necessarily need empathy towards your prey.
Yes, of course you have to, because if you are not able to perceive fear of your and how your prey would perceive fear, you will be less successfully hunting them.
I would probably agree with that in that respect. But I mean, it depends on how we're defining empathy. I'm talking about like because empathy is usually
the standard definition
as sharing a feeling, so that the value is basically linearly connected.
Well, not sharing the feeling, but you're extrapolating the feeling of another. You cannot share the feeling. You can only extrapolate what it is.
Like empathy is to ability to understand and share the feelings of another. Usually, it's not.
No, it's extrapolation from what I know.
Well, like let's just say like, okay, understand. Let's just put this is like understand somebody else's feelings, right?
Yes.
So like you can understand somebody else's feelings without empathizing with them.
Yes, well, you can not. Let's say maybe we could, because we are highly evolved and highly intellectual species. But I would certainly say that it is very beneficial to have actual empathy.
Well, okay, but I guess like the point was that it's actually saying like there's a relationship between your feelings and their feelings, and that's what empathy is kind of implying. And if you're saying that, okay, perhaps let's say like this could be inverted, for example, for a predator, where they would be like they'd get excited at seeing fear and things like that. Yeah, fair enough. And if you want to call that empathy as well, yeah,
no, of course it is empathy.
Different
empathy. It is the understanding of the other's feelings, right? Or the explanation of what they're feeling.
I mean that's the point of definitional problem that I was trying to overcome. But yeah, like let's just say that's that. So you're saying that is what we've evolved in terms of like social dynamics.
No, I say that moral instinct is separate from it, but it is also a necessary thing. We are not simple. We don't have this is for this exactly, and it can also have any other uses. But I would certainly say that it is a building stone in our evolutionary process, which came before the evolution of moral instinct, and moral instinct is reliant on existence of empathy.
I mean, we'll have a few things. I think there's a few things that I have a problem with this.
Great.
So if I understand you, so one, I don't think humans are instinctual. I
disagree.
I see no evidence of instinct.
Don't you see that? Don't you think that parental instinct exists?
No.
No, really. So why would you? So would you be comfortable living child with his or her parents?
Sorry?
Would you be comfortable leaving a child with his or her parents?
Depends on the parents, I suppose. I mean, yes, I'm assuming that
in general.
Parent, yeah, I mean, but if the parents
are
abusive,
why would in general you be able? You be comfortable with it?
It's the norm. It's the convention.
Yes, because you would expect for those parents to take care of those of the child. And why do parents take care of the child?
Because it's a norm and convention within our society.
No, I think it is because of the parental instinct. Because they have always taken care of. Well,
why?
Well, you need to example what is an instinct, right? Instinct is a biological impulse to do something, right? And it is evident in all our history that we've taken care of our young. All other mammals take care of their young. And why do they do this? They do this from something that we call a parental instinct. They are biologically driven to take care of their offsprings. Of course, that is not always the case. The instinct is not always of the same strength as every single individual, but in the overall population, it is true.
In terms of various like change in family structures.
The change in family structures is irrelevant.
No, it's not. Like, for example, so if let's say we had a moral instinct that was in all men, that would like essentially lead to them. Let's like actually define instinct. So if we're going to call instinct, let's say an innate, typically fixed pattern of behavior in animals as a response to certain stimuli. So when a child is born, it relates to an innate fixed pattern of behavior within men to, let's say, look after their children. But then we find that doesn't happen in our society. But it did
does happen in our society.
Only about, what, I think 60% of the time now. Like, so it's I think it's at least 70%, 30% of mothers are single mothers.
Well, that does not mean that their parent impulse is not present in their mate.
No, I mean, the fixed pattern of behavior is not is
single mothers does not necessarily mean that a father is not taking care of the child.
True. I mean, I will grant that. Like, what I'm saying is that there are a much greater likelihood in our society of fathers leaving their children than there was.
I take personal insult with this. Let's say a single parent, or even in some cases both parents.
Why do you take insult in this?
Sorry?
Why would you take a personal insult in that? It's like a sociological fact.
Yeah, I think it was okay. Of course, I can maybe how do you say? I may be projecting my own beliefs onto you, but I think there was overriding motive under why you specifically said father and not a parent. But that's beside the point. That is not something.
Fathers are statistically the ones that leave. Like,
well, that there is also a certain point of mothers which leave, but
there is, but there's not a very small. Like, statistically, our society.
Well, let's not agree on that. This is not a very important point in our conversation.
But it is. It's in terms of, let's say, like a fixed pattern of behavior, a moral instinct to look after your young. And I'm saying that changed from in the span of what, like 40 years to like.
No, it is simply that
fatherless.
It is simply the case that we, as a very rational beings, can choose to ignore our instincts. We can. There is no is from ought, right?
Okay.
You can have an incentive to do a lot of things. You can have incentive to, let's say, have sex and choose not to have sex.
I believe in free will. So I'm not even gonna dismiss that. I don't think you could even have a desire which you reject. But yes, I guess the point I would even say is, like, even prior to this, like, I'd say that, like, even for the desire to be a father, I think is absent in many individuals within our society today, and
yes,
that's how we conditioned.
No, I would say that is, well, you can say part of it is social. I would very differently. I would say it is simply that incentive to have children is smaller than incentive not to have children, and the incentive to have children is both biological and social. But the impulse, the influence not to have children is you can say social, but it can also be.
It's prior to incentive. It's understanding of what is valuable in the first place, like incentivizing something. Like, so for example, like, I think you're assuming like an egoistic kind of basis here. And what I would say is that the understanding of the self, like what is incentivized and what is valuable, what is an incentive and not an incentive, is prior to this, like whether something is positive or negative. It's not in our society that there has been like a dramatic shift that has incentivized characters away from being parents, when other people in society that might have understood themselves and what a good life is to be a father, whilst in our society it might be to consume more. Like, these are different ideological notions of how we understand the self, and this is one of the reasons why I would reject a naturalistic conception of the self, where you could go, actually, humans are a bundle of fixed patterns of behaviors. It's essentially just built up off of.
Well, on a statistic basis, they are. You can be pretty sure how a person. You can have a reasonable expectation of how a person will act, right? That is why when you go to drive, you have. You have expectation that the people will follow rules of driving. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but
so that is
that's sociological, not necessarily biological. So like a sociological function would be like, okay, so like if we all understand ourselves in this way and we are all engaged rationally together, then we engage in a way that is meaningful and valuable. And then someone who breaks the rules, we expect to be punished because they are breaching essentially our shared notions of value.
yes, and but I believe that that there is, of course, you can disagree, and I will be probably the first one to say that that I don't have a definitive proof. This is a hypothesis to prove that such instinct exists. I believe that it does, but that is a belief. That is not 100% guarantee. There is other people who share my belief. Who there is a few studies on genetics which imply that genetics influence our behaviors in those fields which will colloquially be called moral fields. So what is good and right, specifically in case of doing harm to others. I also would like to point out that existence of psychopaths is a very good indication to something like moral instinct existing, because they display a different pattern of behavior than others. You can say that it is down to empathy. I don't think it's down to empathy. I think a lot of those who would be categorized as psychopaths do have a reasonably good interpolation of others' feelings. They simply choose to disregard it.
It's not about an interpretation of another person's feelings. That's why empathy, like in terms of empathy, they usually separate it into non-cognitive and cognitive empathy. So like having an emotional response based off somebody else's experience would be non-cognitive empathy. Having a cognitive emotional response, having a cognitive understanding of an individual's emotions would be cognitive empathy. So like an individual who, and this is, if anything, I would point towards evidence for why like ethics is not based off moral instinct, because if it was a moral instinct, that individual would be condemned to being, let's say, an immoral individual. They would never be able to act morally because they would simply lack the instinct. But what we'll find is with psychopaths that actually can act ethically,
yeah,
and
because
they think.
Morality, or what or ethics, if you want to use it, is not moral instinct. It is a system which comes from moral instinct, and because moral instinct is evident and it produces a pattern of behavior which is easy to replicate, it is easy to use the reason to replicate the behavior.
So you'd say, so there's moral instinct if it's not necessarily, and let's say a psychopath. So you're saying moral instinct's not in a psychopath. So if I say that, let's say psychopaths, we should expect them to act either amorally or immorally necessarily, because the prerequisite for that system is not present. So why don't they? Why don't they behave in a way which is always immoral or amoral?
For the same reasons why we all behave immoral, or whatever. It's because we have incentives. They have a very incentive not to act immorally, because they understand that if they act as or if they break morality, which morality is a system of behavior in place, which is based and reliant upon existence of moral instinct, they understand that if I break morality, I will be punished. And they don't want to be.
That's not true. You could be a horrible human being and not get punished.
Yes, but I would. That is why I have a very narrow definition of morality. Sorry?
So would you say morality is the law?
No, I am not a cultural relativist. I would certainly say that is why I differentiate what is morality and ethics. Ethics is what society enforces, and it is building upon the morality, which is the system which is based purely on a narrow set of rules, which is basically don't harm others, and which is based upon the moral instinct.
So why is it based upon moral instinct?
Because moral instinct gave rise to it. Without the moral instinct, those
you think morality
would not manifest, and later, because there wouldn't be morality, not empathy, but ethics could not build upon it.
But one, like we have seen that there are societies that function without necessarily like this like levels of self-association that we have today. So like we have self-association today where I feel for someone, for example, one, we've already established that an individual could know something that is good or bad, or make a decision, at least a moral judgment.
No, how I came to this conclusion is that I studied and observed a lot of different societies throughout the ages, and I never saw a single society which did not practice this this morality as I describe it.
Is that what we can see is that there are societies which value or don't value others in a way which is nothing like what we have today. So, for example, if Rome looked at people from Gaul and didn't, like Romans wouldn't have felt as strongly about people from Gaul because of self-association. Their ability to associate their experiences with the other individual is what would then lead them to have a non-cognitive response in this respect.
Well, in this case, I would say that they were already under the influence of ethics, there was already morality in place.
Felt this thing, but they just chose to ignore it. Is that what you're saying? You're saying like all the Romans actually felt a moral instinct towards.
Well, we cannot say what all Romans thought, because not all Romans lived.
There's not even reason to believe that any of this is coming from a moral basis in terms of a moral instinct. Like, why would you believe that any of this is coming from an instinct? Like, fixed patterns of behavior. Where's the fixed patterns of behavior?
It is.
If people can ignore them, so they're not fixed. You don't need the instinct, because we've already established psychos can behave in the same way, and the system itself is not. It has changed over time. So it's
the system of morality did not change through time.
But it has.
No, ethics have changed through time, which are building upon the moral system. The moral system is the same.
You don't think that moral associations have changed over time? So let's say in institutions which, like the family, let's say, like you don't think that
family is not a moral institution as I define morality.
Oh, okay. But let's take something like an individual's association with, let's say, friends, family.
Nothing of that is part of the moral system. Moral system has only simple rule, and well, let's say a rule, but you have this instinct, which I believe exists, which prevents you from harming others, and it incentivizes you to punish those who harm others.
Said it doesn't prevent, because you can ignore it. So
well, it provides an incentive. You can always ignore any incentive, right?
Okay, so you have an incentive. So you have an emotional response.
But emotional response. But most of people, in most cases, follow these incentives.
Okay. And that emotional response is based off what stimuli?
Of stimuli of the moral instinct.
But what stimuli is the moral instinct based off?
How do you mean? What is
causing this emotional response, this value response, which you're building your system off?
Do you mean what organ, or what? How do you mean what?
If I was to see an object, do I get this emotional response from a rock?
No.
What do I get it from?
A human.
But why from a human?
Because that is the only. Because this system could only. I would say could only evolve, but I think the only rational explanation for how it evolved is that it evolved as a way of intergroup management. So it was of course a random mutation, and the individual who first has which first this random mutation occurs, were able to to set his group up in a more functional way, to produce a stronger group, in which individuals wouldn't be so needing to be afraid of backstabbing, basically. And this group was more successful, and of course, in that group, genes were interchanged, and that group became more efficient than other groups. And through procreation and competition, it outcompeted and outbreed other groups which did not have this particular mutation.
Right. And so, let's say, so what we say is there's a group who have an emotional response when they see each other, right? Now, I was saying that is based off what? So they're having an empathetic response. You think is based off, let's say, just that being human.
Yes, because at the end of the day, what is the other? It is human. And how can you well, in this case it is. How can you recognize as somebody who, well,
even in terms of intergroup dynamics, you could recognize, let's say, like familiar features.
Yes, but if when systems get bigger and you move from troop to a tribe, there is a lot of the steel principle still is, because you and well, I don't know how you can reasonably hold position that you cannot recognize this other thing is also a human.
No, I think you could recognize something as also human, but I think that would also lead to a concept, the application of a concept rather than and again a notion of self-association rather than necessarily like some sort of like, oh, ping, I feel for this thing now. I think that what happens more, and like what we would typically see, is that intergroup dynamics show that actually we can be quite sadistic to each other. That we can actually enjoy the suffering of others just as much as we can enjoy, or even enjoy the suffering of ourselves in terms of masochism, sadomasochism.
Yeah, of course. There is genetic deviations in all populations.
So I think that like this is again physically reductive. This is like evolutionary psychology, which I think is the worst form of psychology. I think that a better approach to this one, since like this is what if you want to read about a good essay which debunks this, it's Paulo Vernal's Natural Historical Diagrams, which he talks about whether we should look at whether it is nature or if it's just history. We're actually just historically analysing, showing patterns throughout history, and then assuming it's a shared nature, rather than actually providing some sort of mechanistic account of why it actually must be the case. You're assuming it has to have a physical basis rather than a cultural basis. Then two.
Well, there are a few. I also seen a few studies which point out that a certain gene influence how people react in this field. So there is also some. Of course, I would agree. I would agree that it is not a definitive proof, because it is not a very popular field of study for geneticists. But
it's because
sorry, just a second. Još pričam.
Okay, no problem.
Joj, baš me briga za kotlovinu, sad pričam s ljudima. Sorry, I'm back.
No problem. Essentially, one, I would say that Paulo Vernal's Natural Historical Diagrams, I'd recommend checking that out. Two, I would say that in terms of how you understand, let's say, an instinct, let's say a fixed pattern of behavior from this, I'd say that if anything, all you've done is disprove the possibility of this being instinctual. That there is this fixed pattern of behavior that exists within.
Well, it's not fixed.
So yeah, like if you're saying that people have a value response in relation to each other, and this led to.
Well, I say they have incentive. Incentive does not necessarily always translate into behavior.
Yeah. So like if it's like normally when we talk about instinctual behaviors, we would say like an animal has an instinctual behavior to perform a certain action, like a dog has when they turn a certain way around, which they don't normally deny, or it's like fixed and it's apparent in almost all members of the species. When what we actually see in humans is humans are actually very capable of harming each other at alarmingly high rates. And this is actually pretty common. I mean, people are not only into full contact sports, sadomasochism takes a variety of different forms.
Yes, but full contact sports would not be interpreted as doing harm to another.
Well, I mean, it would be. I mean, like if you're bashing someone in the head with your fist, like if you play like MMA, I think that is pretty much causing harm to another, and that is people watching someone
Well,
caused another.
that would be causing damage. Now, that if that would not cause harm, is a
So
different
damage
thing.
and harm. So if you watch someone get their nose broke, you think they're not being harmed.
Well, they are being damaged. If they are being harmed or not is value judgment. You need to, for instance, you need to have your nose broken to have a nose surgery, and a lot of people want to have nose surgery.
Yeah, but I mean, like they're gonna have an experience of pain, right? And like that's
Ready
but this is what it's association with, isn't it? When we're talking
they
about
are ready to accept that pain.
Yeah, but what you're talking about is associating your feelings with another's feelings, like a feeling of let's say aggression, or a feeling of or an understanding of fear, and things like that. People get off the horror films, man. People love horror films. Like all of this.
Because horror films are not harming them.
You're missing the point. I'm saying that people associate with the victims of horror and the perpetrators in horror.
Yeah, they do. That's
from the emotional state of the people involved. Like none of this makes sense in terms of it's more like, this is why I think self-association is a by far better model. Like if you, for example, are watching the horror film and you are trying to indulge a self-destructive drive, and so you're relating yourself to the fear of something coming after you, then this fear is giving you a thrill and an acceleration. It's a simulation of your own desire for self.
I never said that empathy does not exist, and that you cannot extrapolate other feelings to empathy, and that you don't want to.
Like the point is that like this system, like what you're saying, the system is being based off, is like a value response in which we do not want to harm others. I'm saying, well, actually, a lot of us do want to harm others. Like, so that's not really that fixed.
Okay, if we want to harm others, why don't we?
We do. I mean, we had like, if you look at the last century, there was like at least like how many.
Why are you still alive then?
Why am I still alive?
Yeah, why somebody didn't kill you?
Well, like I would say we'll have ethics. That just doesn't mean we don't have drives to hurt each other.
Wait, sorry, can you repeat that?
So, like, one, I don't agree with your morals, like your moral.
Yeah, I understand that. But can you repeat what you said last?
So, like, just because, like, I say we have ethics, people might want to hurt me and not hurt me anyway.
So, at the end of the day, they don't want to hurt you, right?
Well, no, they don't want to kill me.
Well, kill, hurt, the same thing.
There is if kill and hurt is the same thing, but
killing is just the greatest form of hurt, let's say. But why didn't somebody kill you yet?
You cannot say that after saying that damage and harm is not the same.
Well, it's not necessarily the same. It is often the same, but not necessarily the same.
Killing and hurting is. Come on, man.
Yeah, killing and hurting is the same.
Like, so, like, not necessarily, no.
Tell me
which is not might want to cause me to suffer. Like, so the people that want to cause more suffering to an individual hurt an individual more than if they were to kill them, like torture.
I would disagree with that. I would think that killing is worse than torturing.
Look, even if I agree that killing is worse, I'd be making a moral judgment there, and like an ethical judgment in the sense of like terms of the interests of an individual. But that's not what you're doing. You're essentially relating it to the experience of some sort of emotive state. Because you're saying that it's a moral instinct, right? So it's just like my ability to emotionally empathize and relate to another's emotions in a positive or negative way, which is supposed to relate me to be incentivized to not harm. So, like people could have a desire to hurt me but not kill me.
Yeah, they can, because what will stop them from going through with their instinct? Oh, no, sorry, not really, but with that desire to kill you. I believe that the part of it is a moral instinct. In most people, of course.
I think you can get people who do it like... So, for example, they might want to hurt us, but they might realize it's wrong. They'll be like, oh, that's wrong.
Yes, of course. Why do they realize that it's wrong? Because that is how moral instinct manifests itself.
It's how they've been taught from being children.
Well, you can say that it is how they're being taught. I think it is
Thankfully.
that a moral instinct plays a great deal in
But
this,
why?
and it is only reinforced
That's what I'm
with
saying.
standard
The
pattern
incentive,
of education and growing up, basically.
they have the desire to hurt me. And let's say they let's say they have a desire to hurt me, right? But they do not, and so in that, they have a much smaller desire at that point to hurt me than to wish me well, right? Right, and I've been punched in the face before, man. So I happen to know that at least at one point in my life, someone has punched me in the face, and their desire to hurt me definitely overcame their desire to not hurt me.
Yes,
Right? Okay.
all the time, people's
Yeah.
desire to hurt somebody overrides their desire not to hurt somebody. But the existence of this desire not to hurt somebody, I think, is down to the moral instinct.
But this is the thing. It's like what makes this instinct moral and not like so like in terms of like how
It is just a name.
it's just the name. Yeah, exactly. So like the other forms of like of drives towards the expression of desires in relation to each other have just as much bearing on how our society is actually formed.
Well, yes, but this is a
Yeah.
well. We are
So
not
like
we are not a single instinct species. So
and people can and as you said, people can deny this instinct anyway. They can just reject
of course they can. Otherwise,
based
there
on,
will be no crime.
based on reasons and stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering why we even think that this is an instinct and why humans are even instinctual. So like when we talk about instinctual animals, we'd be like, right, when a dog walks in a circle, it's not because they think that like and can reject it. It's because this is an inbuilt behavior. If we were to find dogs don't like extrapolate outwards and like, why do I walk in a circle before lying down? They just do it. That would be an instinctual behavior.
Yeah, I'm not arguing that our instinct is as strong as the instinct in many other animals, or that we are not the thing that we are capable of using our intellect to analyze our behavior. I'm not disagreeing with that, and sorry, and I am not dismissing this, but this would be this would be this does not mean that there is no incentive in us to do things. There is obviously there is a biological incentive to do
Not
in us.
instinct. Like that's the thing. Like you can't say an incentive is an instinct. So, like, if I have an incentive, like if like I have like pain and pleasure responses and
Okay, so
all the time.
can you tell me why I believe I probably I would say that you desire sex. Why do you desire sex?
Right, because I've been sociologically conditioned to express my drives in that way.
So you think that if you were
If I
growing
grew
alone
in a society,
without any society, you wouldn't masturbate?
I think that there is the you could or like to give you a better example, I think you could grow up in a society which leads you to reject your sex drive.
Yes, you can grow in society which brainwashes you
That's
in
not an
many other
instinct.
ways, but because
It's not
they can provide incentive for you
It's not
to
even
give up.
it's not even brainwashing. It's how you understand the drive.
No, it is simply that they provide incentives which are contradictory to your natural instincts.
You don't have a nature. You haven't provided evidence for a nature. You've just
Well,
said people throughout
I
history have.
didn't provide concrete evidence. Of course, I provided some which I believe for me are sufficient. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, so people behave in a
Okay,
certain
sorry.
throughout time.
So I provided some. Sorry, what is the word? Not evidence, but some. Sorry, my brain is not really working anymore very well. Not proof, but some. Shit. Wait, check. What? Sorry, notice. Sorry.
I said it's all right. Just get your thoughts together. It's fine.
Yeah, no, I won't. Not evidence, but yes, I have things to that lead me to believe this thing, which I would say that it's not absolutely airtight, 100% think that I can prove it is a hypothesis, and I would like to, and I think it is the hypothesis which I find credible, and which I would of course try to prove. And I will you sorry.
See, I would say that I think it makes more sense to us understand this in terms of self-association, which would explain why from culture to culture we have an expanding relationship with otherness. So, like, for example, you start off as a tribe, and then you turn into, you start off as like let's say a clan, and then you turn into a tribe, and then it turns into a city-state, and then the city-state turns
No,
into.
that is simply down to economics.
I don't think it is down to economics.
Yes,
I think
it
that
is.
it's not, because look, you can have economic relations between, let's say, like you can have an empire, for example, which could have total dominion over an area, and so like be economically viable, but then not also relate to the value of those individuals who are not of a certain class. For example, Romans. The Roman Empire was huge, but actually like only a select group of individuals were considered valuable within their ethical framework. Their self-association was limited to a group of individuals.
That is absolutely not true.
But it is true, because they enslaved Gauls and then used them to build their roads, and many of them died in the process. And it would also make them fight.
Yes, they did enslave people. There was incentive for them to do so.
They'd also just rape and murder them.
Yeah, there was incentive to do that as well.
So yeah, the Romans definitely did value one class of individuals more than another.
Yeah, well, when you say they were a minority, I would say that free people of Rome were a majority rather than minority, but okay.
But even in Rome, there was even classes of individuals which would associate with their own class more than another. For example, they would look down on the lower classes in Rome because they were very hierarchical.
Yes, patrician and plebeians, but there was also, even in the time of the Rome, there was also evident to all of, and there is even writings about it, that it is the plebeians who have the power, and that is why they have the defender of the plebs, right? There was a very important function in the Republic.
But that doesn't mean that they're necessarily associated with them morally. Like, this is like the point I'm saying is that who was valuable and who was considered valuable has been hierarchized.
Well,
and
valuable is, as we probably could, is a term that comes down to.
People would cause harm to the plebs without real consideration unless there was like going to be a public.
No, that is untrue. Causing damage to a plebeian would lead to prosecution.
I mean, like, take for example, I can't remember his name. He was actually friends with Commodus. What was he called? He essentially starved the plebs in an attempt to gain more power. He didn't necessarily morally care about that group of individuals, did he?
Well, Commodus was an emperor, and what happened to Commodus?
He
was killed, right?
Yeah, but it was his friend. Actually, it wasn't even him, and he was also killed. But the thing is that the point of what I'm saying is that in terms of even the emotional relationship to plebs was far less than the emotional relationship to other members of the same class. It comes down to self-association. My understanding of another individual's feelings is how much I'm projecting of my consciousness onto them, how much I'm willing to associate myself with them. That's what I've been arguing.
Yes, it is definitely true that you have a stronger empathic relationship with those who are closer to you and which share more of their experiences with you, because you are able to more accurately extrapolate their feelings. That is absolutely true. But that is why moral instinct and empathy are not the same.
But this is what I'm saying in terms of in terms of moral instinct. Like if an individual's experience of value in terms of the feelings of another, so like something that would motivate them towards action. I mean, what you're describing as moral instinct, I think almost everyone would describe as an empathetic response of value. Like they do not want other people to be harmed. Like they feel bad when other people are harmed.
Well, that would often be described as compassion, not simple empathy. Is purely ability to.
Okay, compassion. Like that, let's say your ability to feel compassion, or the ability to feel compassion, is dependent upon self-association. Like my point is that this has actually changed in terms of the development of psychology over time, which is why we've seen the expansion into a global ethic, which is the association of humanity. It's not that you've looked at another human's face and been like, oh, actually, this has caused a stimulation of my moral instinct. It's actually that before that, you've actually begun to associate yourself with them because you've recognized value within them, and now you're getting the value response. You're
Well,
putting the for the horse.
no, I think that when first, I don't think that there is this. Okay, this feeling of value simply means that I am not ready to harm this individual outright. And throughout history, you will see that very rarely, almost never, is the first contact ever violent. In the most cases, the violence comes after the another influence. Another influence was incentive was evident before the initial contact. If you go to contact between Vikings and Native Americans for instance, in Newfoundland, the very first contact was peaceful, and in many other places, majority the standard process for the first contact is at the beginning peaceful. Only after the let's say we measured the size of the other, we say, okay, I can now do a violent action which I have incentive in, let's say, wealth or whatever, and this other is not capable of fighting back. So there is not an added incentive of fear to prevent me from doing what I.
Why is that happening at all? So let's say they don't have the negative incentive of fear, okay, but then they should have the moral instinct of not hurting them. So
Yes,
why don't
they have the moral instinct.
Are you saying that?
But they have
empathetic.
other instincts, not instinct, but other reasons that overpower this instinct.
We see the exact opposite of this. So, for example, even in like measuring like empathetic responses of things like farmers, we see that they have a diminished sense of empathy. People that engage in practices which harm others, like say soldiers and things like that, also atypically have a diminished sense of empathy. They don't actually feel the same. They don't have that experience. Like that psychology is not as basic. Like you take psychology to be a basic evolutionary response. What I take those basic evolutionary responses to be as a broad empirical foundation from which a psychology is built upon and can go any number of ways. So, like, all you've described is that humans have drives, and how they express those drives has led to our society. Well, yes, but not because it was destined or fixed or determinate because of some sort of biological response, but because of the sociological construction that is our society has led it this way.
Well, you in this sentence, I think you contradict yourself. First, you say we have constructed this society because of drive, and then you said this society is not because of drive; it is because of sociological things.
I didn't say that.
Yes,
I didn't say that we constructed our society because of drive. I said that you take our society to be constructed because of drive. Well, like, and so like everything that's constructed here is because of a pre-built fixed pattern of behavior, which is incentivized by these drives. But what we typically find is that various societies express the exact same drives in a numerous, almost a variety of different ways, which allow for the inclusion or exclusion of certain groups of individuals, certain modes of value experience in relation to pain and pleasure of individuals, and based on notions of self-association.
Yes, but why do they exclude such individuals? Because there is a incentive to do so.
There is an ethic. There is an ethic. What they believe is correct.
No. The ethics is
no.
What? Well, of course, ethics exists because I said that it exists. It is what society enforces. But this, in these cases, were done because of some other incentive. there is an incentive under everything we do. So let's say, why did, for instance, let's say Mayas. Why did Mayas sacrifice? Aztecs. Why did Aztecs sacrifice people to their gods?
I would happily say there is a drive beneath everything they do. And that drive is in relation to a belief state about trying to bring around some sort of perceived value.
Okay, how did any belief came to be?
Well, through the production of, through a rational, so I would say it's through the application of reason to, one, predetermined categories of existence and intuition, like Kantian space-time causation, right, was associate various events intuitionally, and then two, so like, in that respect, that's how we could get theories of constant conjunction, and then we would then self-relate, so you'd see certain behaviors as being akin to our own behaviors, which allow for intergroup dynamics, which allow for the designation of certain objects and certain modes of being, which allows the production of language and self-association. Mutual recognition allows for the production of language as a form of equipment, which allows for the production of syllogistic reasoning and conversation, dialogue, which then allows for the extrapolation and abstraction into modes of philosophy and social life. And then we have the production of ethics. So the self-association at the foundation of all society, like the ways in which we are associating, how we are choosing to engage with each other. These are the foundations for what we would then, what would be then our moral endeavors. Our moral endeavors are subsequent to ethics, not precedent.
Okay, so how do you envision this to happen? Like
how would
practically.
What do you mean? How would I imagine this would happen? I just explained.
Okay, so what does that mean in like ordinary words? How do you think a caveman or Homo erectus or whatever it was, however early we want to go, came to these conclusions?
I think that an individual would sort of be acting on a means-ends relationship, right? They have like
okay, give me an example.
Yeah, so like want a rock, I don't know, an apple actually would make more sense, right? That's the one fruit that have a drive towards consumption. They've interpreted that drive, or they have a let's say at that point a emotional response in relation to, let's say, certain colors and certain scents and stuff like that, and so they act.
So there is a biological drive to get the apple.
Yeah, I agree. I've already said.
Okay.
Of course, I don't agree. I don't disagree with biological drives. No one disagrees with biological drives.
Okay, so let's go from there. So there is an apple, and and that individual wants an apple. What's next?
Okay, so then another individual rocks up. They also want the apple. They end up in, through relationships in terms of, they then start looking at each other, observing each other's behavior, and then begin to self-associate. They understand them as another human like them, or another individual who acts in a certain way like them, and they understand their desire is for the apple as well. And then this leads to an existential relationship, essentially a relationship of mutual recognition. I recognize you as having drives of your own, and you recognize me as having drives of my own. And this leads to social dynamics, which allow for self-understanding. I now get the opportunity to get your observations of me, and you get my observations of you. And so what I am becomes a group. We become a we. We become like an institution, a family, for example. And we start to try and satisfy our drives together. These are the...
Well, that is not true. We were already because...
Yes,
I don't know how you want to go, how back you want to go, but we were already living in group societies.
I mean, but to be fair, like at the very foundation, we're always going to find a family, right? We're always going to find, in terms of humans and in terms of nature, we're going to find that humans most likely engaged with family that had parents, and like the first relationship with otherness was actually like a sociological condition. Which
there was a troop. The troop is the oldest form of
that's like
humanoid.
So like the foundation of this, I mean, like would be psychoanalytic. is like the Oedipus and Electra complex, the mirror stage, that kind of stuff, where essentially you start like you look to your mother as the object of your desire, then your father comes in and it castrates your desire, and this leads to a psychological process in which you associate otherness with the castration of your desires to varying degrees. And this is how self-association forms at the most basic level, and then you have obviously group to group, or you have like various intergroup self-associations and group-to-group self-associations, and this can expand to point of nations where we have like national self versus like.
You wait! You jumped from the troop to a nation. That is a jump of like 100 million years.
Yeah, I didn't. I said like actually like the most basic foundation was like a family, and then you could say that then it would become like intergroup, and then intergroup could find group to group, and like really what was
family was not. Okay, you can say the troop is a family, but it is not necessarily.
Yeah, like I mean, like it depends on how you want to define it. I mean, in terms of like clans and so on, like the development of various like sociological structures, it doesn't really matter. Like that's not the point I'm getting at. The point I'm getting at is that it's basic self-association all along the way, and that this is where.
People definitely associate themselves as a part of a group.
In terms of like self-association, what we have is the internalization of otherness and the self, and once we have that, then we gain a partial notion of identity, and that identity becomes, let's say, my identity of my troop, and then I engage with another troop, and then we have again the same existential mutual recognition of my identity engaging with your identity.
How would you engage with another troop?
Until this is the thing, like how it always relates is dependent upon my notion of what others are, and let's say my feelings.
Physically, practically, how would you do it?
This is what I'm saying. So I'm saying practically, like, for example, Lacan would describe this in terms of, let's say you're a praying mantis, right? And he says, like, let's say you put a praying mantis and there's a female praying mantis there. You don't know whether you're presenting as a male praying mantis or a female praying mantis. That is the experience of existential angst. That's like anxiety, where you don't know what you are in the eyes of the other. So, like, let's say two individuals come into a clearing and they're from two separate tribes. They don't know how the other tribe views them, and how they and their view of the other tribe is dependent upon that. So it leads to a feeling of anxiety, and so that leads to either like relationships of like trying to become diplomatic, or it can cause conflict. And these happen in various different ways depending upon not just first contact, but like even ongoing contact, in terms of like we have a different notion of honor to your version of honor, and so you've insulted me, and now I have to seek some sort of notion of punishment, and then my notion of punishment against you is seen as unjust, and then your rejection of that punishment.
What we have is a different notion of what harm is.
We have a different notion of what is right.
No, what harm is. We all know what right is, because that is what is. I would say that this is where
like, so for example, like you could understand that an individual has committed an act of wrong. So I could understand that like someone goes up.
No. Before we go into, I would like to discuss this first meeting of two people.
Okay. So we have two people who've met from, well, let's say two different tribes who've met, and let's say, I think even a first meeting it doesn't have to be a first meeting. It could be like, again, a diplomatic adventure between two tribes which are meeting for the first time.
Well,
or for
the meaning, the intent of seeking other cannot be because you don't know if other is. So there cannot be a purely diplomatic mission, let's say, in the strictest term of the word diplomatic. But when two people meet, and when two groups meet, usually that is by circumstances, what tends to happen in most cases, almost always, what tends to happen is they try, as you said, they try to come to some understanding of each other. And you say that is down to association with another, and probably that is true. And I think, why do people want to associate themselves with another?
It's not an understanding of the other, it's also an understanding of themselves.
Yeah.
So trying to understand themselves.
Whatever. Look, why they don't immediately attack the other,
That's
as
like
most others do, is down to the moral instinct, because they understand that
that. Like if I just like just to one, it's not whatever, because the important thing in the situation which Lacan's trying to get at when he says and people are having anxiety about how other people see them is I'm not scared of what they are. I can see what they are. What I can't see is what I am to them. This is why, like, in terms of existential, the development of self, when I come into contact with another group, it negates my understanding of myself. It's not that I'm now, I do not understand who I am, not that I don't understand who they are, or at least in the sense that in not understanding who they are, I do not understand who I am.
So what this comes down to, in your belief, is that if they are stronger than me or not.
No.
Okay, so then I don't understand what you're.
It comes down, like, for example, do they want to attack me? Do they think that am I valuable to them? Like, so for example, like if we walk into the situation and let's say like I may be like, are they sexually attracted to me? What are their behaviors in terms of rituals? Am I what would be my place in terms of that behavior? Like I think about myself in terms of the possibilities of their life. I'm thinking about myself as a possibility, as an object of their experience. What could I be for them?
Well, that's definitely a thought that runs through your head.
Yeah,
I would certainly agree with that.
Yeah, so like that's where I would say that that's where like we get basic self mutual recognition. So like I'm recognizing someone looking back at me, which forces me to doubt my own understanding of self.
Well,
I
would definitely say that. I would definitely say that in case of you meeting another, you will judge him and yours, and you will definitely compare yourself. Let's say this in a very normal language, and you will also be anxious about the expectation of them towards you, and this is all understandable and this is all true. But I think, why would I also believe that there is this instinct in both of you. Well, not necessarily in both of you, but in most cases in both of you. Of course, you can by chance run into a psychopath, and there is this incentive for that first action not to run into violence, not to run into attack of each other, but instead to give both of you, let's say, a grace period, something that would say, okay, there is this person, I recognize this person.
Why would that go away? So like, okay, we have this value of each other. Why is it just going to disappear?
Because
like, so each other, and then I realized like, oh, and I now understand like their physical strength and so on. But then that had nothing to do with why I valued them, right? That wasn't the moral instinct.
No, the moral instinct is still there, but it is overpowered by your instinct but your interest in, let's say, acquiring the resources.
What even makes this an instinct, and let's say my desire for the resources not?
It is, well, if your desire for resources are instinctual, because you have instinctual drive to acquire resources, right?
So I mean, like, this is the problem, right? You're kind of just saying that everything's an instinct. You're just saying all human behavior is instinct because you're saying that we'll have value responses. But then I say that those value responses, you see, my issue is I think that those value responses are sociologically conditioned and expressed.
Well,
so like,
I don't think that
how you understand yourself
expressed
in relation to your community, in relation to how you should engage with outsiders and others and so on, creates a plethora of different desires. So you get people like, for example, if you're in a community of, let's say, Tibetan monks, like you're probably not gonna go to war, even if it would value you to produce,
Not
even if it would be
necessarily.
valuable for you to produce.
There is not a single group of people which did not produce warriors.
I'm not saying that there is. I'm not saying that like it's ubiquitous and that war and like crime and like wrong behavior isn't ubiquitous amongst all clans of individuals and all types of individuals in every society ever. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying different societies sublimate their drives in different ways. So then you get a variety of different desires. You can get like people who sublimate their desires in one way in relation to others, and people who sublimate their desires in another way in relationship to others.
Yes,
and this is
all societies recognize the drives in their members because they are universal, and they approach them and they accentuate different things, and they deal with those same desires differently. That is why I say the ethics builds upon what I call morality.
But this is where I would say it's the other way around. I'd say that your morality, which is like, oh, thank you for the donation, man. Sorry.
Really donated £5.
Sitting there.
I'm late, but I love your work, Lewis. Keep it up.
Thanks, man. I deleted the chat by accident. Oh well. Okay, but like essentially the self association. This is the thing, right? So like what I would say is your understanding of self underpins your expression of your preferences. Your drives are abstract and indeterminate. You get feelings, but how to express those feelings in a way which is constructive, in a way which leads to certain rational conclusions, is built up from mutual self-association within, let's say, as you say, a troop, and then let's say a tribe or a clan, and then that builds up until we have more complex social structures. And so the more complex our social structures become, the more complex our psychology becomes in relation to expressing notions of value, because we are internalizing.
Yes, I don't disagree with that. I don't disagree with the notion that society guides its members, but the saying that members don't have biological incentives to doing things
no
is
one's
wrong.
denying biology.
Yeah,
no,
and I would say that there is a biological incentive in humans not to harm each other, and of course we can go around.
But the only is like that wouldn't even, like, even if I accept that wouldn't explain this structure. It would only explain that there is a propensity for this structure to even develop. Now, the reason I related to Paulo Verno before is because if we accept that there is an empirical foundation, let's say like that, drive system, like, you know, I feel positive, like, and negative in relation to certain, because I'm a human being, you know, like, you know, I feel pain and pleasure in relation to my physical environment. Like, this is fine. Like, I'm happy to say that, like, yes, I do have receptivity and I do feel positive and negative stimuli. How I then structure myself around that stimuli is based on my self-understanding, and it's based on how we interconnect socially. And so what we have is, rather than a fixed pattern of behavior like an instinct, we have a natural historical foundation where, like, I sublimate my drives in a specific way because I'm a member of this tribe at this time, and this is and these are the stock concepts that I can use to understand myself. So I have a biological foundation, which is then sublimated into a sociological environment.
Yes, and that's, but you cannot disagree that all societies that we can observe, not just now but throughout history, have a certain set of rules which are present in all of them, and that can be a case of either either evolution which is from a single point of convergent evolution. So those are two options. So why do those societies have this. Either they develop it independently through independently, or does this come from a single source which is older than those societies? I believe that it is basically both. Both is that they have independently came to the same conclusions because they stem from human nature, and that basically because it is from human nature, it was present at the beginning.
Right. So I think we're probably making headway in building a bridge there, because I would agree that we have the natural propensities to commit certain actions, drives, but then I would say that the foundation isn't, let's say, an empirical foundation which allows us to have a fixed pattern of behavior, but we have a drive system, like a punishment reward system, which then when we engage in sociological in reasoning in an abstract thought, can then be expressed in almost an infinite number of ways, which is how we have like the variety of different desirous expressions we have today. And that depends upon the psychological constituents of the society itself. So how we self-associate with each other allows us to create new and different modes of expressing our drives, which then forms our moral endeavors. I want an apple rather than act upon an emotive drive, because of how I've learned to express those emotive drives in ways that are more complex and meaningful. I've sublimated them.
Yeah, but
So this is rational, and this is ethics. This is where ethics comes in.
Well,
how I choose to self-associate, and why I choose to self-associate. Let's say how I choose to interact with others. Like once I get the understanding of basic concepts, I can understand like self, otherness, and so on. Then I can come to more complex notions of intersocial interactions. And when I look into ethics, I try to create the social interactions which best express my drives. And I would say that the social interactions which best express your drives best recognize what you are in terms of consciousness, in terms of the universality of value. And that's how you best express your drives.
Well, you best express your drives, I would say, by actions. But this is probably the problem. This is a problem which I run into quite often, because I admit I use quite a proprietary definition of morality. I would say that you wanting an apple is not a moral question. But you would, of course, say that it is a moral question, because you say that what we want and what and let's say not, but that what is good is something that is objective, and that it is like all parts, all aspects of human life. I would disagree with that.
Say it's a moral question for the very reason that self-association modifies and changes the different ways you can express your drives. And so what you're trying to do when you're trying to express your drives and you're trying to aim for freedom is you're trying to create a universal principle which expresses freedom to the greatest degree amongst all individuals. That's essentially what we're trying to do. You try to create an equal relationship. As soon as it's unequal, then you don't know whether you're actually obtaining the correct expression of your freedom. That's the point. Like morality is subsequent to ethics.
Yeah, we also don't agree on the freedom part, right?
But so you think that we're not free?
No, I simply said that what freedom is. Freedom is ability to independent action.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, so I thought you were relating it back to biology. I thought you were going to make a causal account for human nature.
But no, well, freedom in human nature, I would definitely. In talks of, I would agree. I would admit much lower requirements for mental exercise. I usually say that the freedom of, and maybe it is also useful to say here, the freedom of the organism stops where the power of the organism stops.
See, I would say that in terms of power, I think that looking at power in like understanding that humans are sociological creations and not just biological productions, you start realizing that actually our mental states are produced by a social relationship which allows us to sublimate our drives in new and various different ways. So our self-understanding and our preferences are only ours to the degree in which they actually align to what is valuable to us. And to understand that, we have to engage in a social scenario which is equal, which is why equality and freedom are fundamental to each other. But you know, like I would recommend, like if you want to understand like my notion of freedom, I get your notion of freedom, it's Hobbesian. If you want to understand my notion of freedom, it's Hegelian. There's a really great book called Free Will in Continental Philosophy by David Edward Rose. I recommend checking that out. There's a section in it which is actually on Hegel, and it's like Hegel, Action and Avoiding Death is chapter 4. And if you look on that, there's model 1, which is empiricism, which is your model. There's
no
model 2.
disrespect, but Hegel died, I believe, in 1831, and Original Species was published in 59. So
yeah, I don't think the value of someone's work is dependent upon the year they were born.
No, but it is dependent on the information they were privy to, and he was not privy to Original Species.
Well, one, I'd say that in terms of the depth of Hegelian thought, I think that most analytic thought actually today is not as deep. And also, this book was published in let's check. I think it was in 2000.
Well, that particular book was published.
This book was in 2009. So, on that respect, you know, it goes through the philosophy of Hegel. It goes through into Rawls, Vatimo, Marx, and Marcuse.
If there is a difference, then that is not what Hegel wrote, right? That is
Hegel said there's a chapter in this book which is on Hegel and various explanations of human freedom, and it points out that the Hegelian explanation is better than the empirical explanation, which finds its roots actually prior to Hegel anyway. So which is chapter 4, and there's model 1, which is empiricism. There's model 2, which is expressivism, and then expressionism, and then there's model 3, which is hermeneutics. And I would take a hermeneutic explanation of the self and freedom.
But from what, I would admit I'm not as read on philosophy as you, not even closely. But what I understand from most of this is that all philosophers take it as given that humans are rational, very highly intelligent, and they were always highly intelligent and rational, and that is simply not the case.
I don't. I would agree with you there. I can say that people are not always highly intelligent and rational. I can agree.
No, I mean today on average they are, but to history or species and to species that preceded us, we were not as highly rational and highly intelligent as we were now. And to say that time left no influence on us would be, I think that would be inaccurate.
I mean, I think actually that goes counteract of what Hegel would write in the first place, because he takes a historical approach to ethics. It's actually shown like a rational, logical development that has been proceeding through history.
Yes, but he only takes to ethics historical view up to like what, Mesopotamia. He cannot possibly take it any further than that. There is 100 million years of history before it.
That's exactly what biologists do, man. They just start, they essentially associate certain behaviors and drives that we've seen throughout history and make generalizations of them. They're like, oh, everyone's always behaved like this. That's why Paulo Verno made his argument about natural historical diagrams, where it's like, actually, you're taking a historical account and you're assuming a natural account, when you should instead take a natural historical account. You should instead say that we've got a biological propensity, but how it's expressed in terms of a complex society is what we're talking about. And so in terms of the development of self, we can see the development of self, we can track that through basically from over 2,000 years ago. And so we can see
over 2,000 years ago is a very small period of time.
Well, yeah, but it's all we've got to work with in terms of, and it also does show rational development anyway.
It does not.
But it does. I mean, like,
I mean, if you take somebody from 2,000 years ago and put him, a baby 2,000 years ago and put it out, it would be the same as you.
No, it wouldn't. I mean, in terms of biology, it would be the same as me. Is that what you're getting at? Like, you're saying, like,
Yeah, it would be, biologically, it would be the same as you.
yeah, okay, fair enough. Like, I have not really got an issue with that. There's not that many differences in 200,000 years either, to be entirely honest with you.
Well, in 200,000 years, there is even in like 50,000 years, but that is beside the point.
No, it's not like a huge difference. I mean, like,
it's pretty significant.
Like, I mean, it's pretty significant in the sense, like, in terms of like one aesthetic differences, but also in like the terms of like brain development. Yeah, I mean, like, like in terms of like brain size, things like that. Like, even if you look, you can even see like brain size dropped after in one period. So like there was like a period like the brain size was actually, from what I'm aware, it was like the cranial size was largest prior to becoming plains animals, and then like not in terms of our overall development, which I think our brain size is now the largest in general, but in terms of before that, there was like a period of what we believe would be famine, which led would have become plains animals, which would have been why we would have engaged in cooking, hunting, let's say eating like tuberous vegetables and stuff like that as well. But like obviously brain size had to be a significant before we could even begin hunting, because we had to understand how to hunt. And then a period of increased calories from whether it's eating tuberous vegetables or whether it's hunting or whatever, also led to essentially the growth of our brains again. Obviously, greater access to glucose.
To calories in general.
Yeah. Well, I mean, glucose specifically, since your brain runs on primarily glucose.
But you produce glucose.
So like your brain runs primarily on glucose. So high glucose sources are the best for increasing brain size. Just increased excess calories in general. I mean, your body uses carbohydrates in a way that's more more efficient. So yeah, especially complex carbohydrates give you like longer.
Let's not have a nutritional discussion that will not get us anywhere.
Well, I mean, it's just a point, because a lot of people like to try and say that we're intelligent. Yeah, but it's just not necessarily shown to be the case.
No, it is simply down to like abundance of calorie, and meat was the most calorie-rich food at a time.
Unlikely. Actually, it would have probably been tuberous vegetables. Calorie-rich food at the time wouldn't have probably been meat, because of the, like, if you look at like even game, things like deer and stuff like that, it's actually really lean, and you get far less calories per pound of muscle tissue than you do from something like a potato.
Yeah, but unlike potato, meat is available year round. So.
Well, I mean, like, actually, tuberous vegetables are really highly available, and yeah, meat is available, and I don't deny that we would have engaged in meat in terms of scarcity food. But if we're seeing like, okay, we can get meat all year round, but we can also get a higher, a better food source from, let's say, tuberous vegetables. Yeah, and we know that the fossilized species of our ancestor contains over 100 grams of fiber. So they're eating incredibly fibrous diets.
Well, we cannot. It is hard to say what we ate from a single, because at the end of the day, there is quite a small number of fossils from that period that pertain to our diet. But there is also you can also point at a lot of that certain.
Fiber.
Sorry?
But in the fossilized species that we have found, it has more than 100 grams of fiber, like about 110 grams of fiber a day.
And the others that was proven that 80% of the food was animal origin.
I've never seen that. I've never seen the study that proves that. I've seen that and even in that, like, it's almost impossible to prove that. One of the biggest issues was the animal products deteriorate. So like, even if they are eating them, like, this is one of the issues with these studies, is that the only way that we'd normally find that people are eating animal products isn't through their feces, it's through finding bones of dead animals. Like it's not necessarily in the feces itself.
Yes, there was also cases of evident hypervitaminosis A and such things, but that is not the most important part of this conversation.
Well, I think I agree. It's not like that important. I don't think that it's like a big deal. I was just pointing it out because a lot of people do like to argue that anyway. Like it's like this sort of.
No, we are opportunist eaters. We will eat whatever is available to us. That is one of great advantages of our genus, that we are able to eat pretty much almost anything.
I think like the thing that would seem to thrive most on is probably starch-based diets. And I think that's even and I think like in terms of we would have had less of a kickback with animal products back when we had a life expectancy of like 40, but now we'll have a life expectancy obviously of about 80.
Yeah, I would definitely
sclerosis
not argue for keto diet or whatever.
Yeah,
I eat standard diet, not any prescriptive diet.
Most people don't necessarily eat keto. I mean, like you could even point out like most of people in our society get atherosclerosis and they don't eat anywhere near as much meat as keto, which is like insane amount of meat.
Well, at the end of the day, you need to die for something, but
years of your life attached to an oxygen bottle.
Well, yeah, it's the oxidation that it kills you in the end. Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, well, we do all die of something. It's just whether it's like you would want to hasten it, make it more painful, things like that. Don't get me wrong. Like I'm not like saying I'm living the most healthy diet because I'm like the most junk food person ever. It's just one of those. This is one of those things. It's like whether it's healthy or not. It's like meat's not healthy.
Well, it's when you say meat is not healthy, that is categorized. That would like mean that a small portion of meat is that extremely detrimental to your health, which is absolutely not true.
So for example, like
it's not true.
Animal protein, we see that it is negatively affects kidneys, increases risk of kidney disease, kidney stones. We see that and in kidney failure, we see that heme iron increases iron to toxic levels. The consumption of essentially blood, like bloody meat, essentially increases iron levels to the point in which they become detrimental. It also increases the oxidation of cholesterol, which increases likelihood of heart attacks.
Yeah, that's probably why you should cook
dementia, Alzheimer's, erectile dysfunction.
Erectile dysfunction.
And there's like quite a few diseases that it negatively impacts. It also higher intake of saturated fat from animal products increases likelihood of diabetes by killing beta.
That is all again. That is all mostly linked to red meat. Mm-hmm.
Well, no, I mean like saturated fat is like ubiquitous almost amongst. Amongst most forms of meat. Like most saturated fat in the United States is consumed through chicken. But so it's not like that. No, it genuinely like meat, dairy, and eggs. Eggs are really bad for you. Even like meaty does usually concede that eggs are that bad for you. Like I know my Nana's doctor when she this was back when I was like.
Well, I'm not a nutritionist, and I would not really...
that like don't eat more than one egg a week because he was a cardiologist.
Yeah, I'm not a nutritionist. Nutritionist. So I don't think that.
I'm imagining someone who's obviously like I'll leave this to the scientists.
Yeah, I don't think. And of course, being healthy as possible is not my first priority, and I would.
I know what you mean.
Yeah, so I don't know why we are discussing this.
Because it's more of like obviously it has moral impact, and also.
I would argue that it doesn't, but okay.
It does, of course it does. Like it's like smoking. It's like understanding whether smoking's good or bad. It's like whether it's actually expressing my preferences correctly or not in the first place.
Well, self-knowledge. I would say that is not a moral question.
Understanding yourself as someone who doesn't care about health, you need to understand what we are talking about in terms of these values that you are going to experience in your life. This is why self-association is so important.
Well, yeah, but again, you say that is. Okay, we have different definition of the word morality, which is quite often the case with when I talk to people. But
I mean, like, even if I accept yours, I just don't think that you've gave a good descriptivist account of morality. I don't think you've actually described the moral process accurately because one, I think that your instincts are if they're just basic drives, then you've not actually showed the development of why our societal structure is developed the way it is, because those drives can be expressed in a variety of different ways depending
No,
upon
it can only be
societal
expressed.
structure.
No,
Which is why,
moralism can only
and
be.
even in terms of an evolutionary biological account, they usually don't point towards instincts, from what I'm aware. They usually point towards pro-social behaviors and so on, and then sociality is just essentially pro-social and anti-social behaviors, which I still think's bad. But I don't think I don't agree with your approach at all. Like even on a descriptivist account.
Sorry, my dog bothered me for a bit. Something to be. Some behavior to be pro-social or anti-social. First, of course, we need to see what is the incentive for that behavior. And I would say that instincts, and well, you can so say that those are not instincts, that they are biological drivers, but to be fair, I don't see much of a difference.
It's not necessarily a drive, but like that it's a value response. But yeah, like I would say, like you've got drives. I'd say I'm happy to say that you've got social drives, if that's.
Well, you also have biological drives. You cannot disagree with that.
Like as I said, I'm not arguing against biology.
Yeah, and I would say that these biological drives influence the development of society. Correct.
I think that they've been expressed through society. I think that society's influenced them.
Don't you think that biological drives to, let's say, procreate were older than organized society and ends in...
But I think that if you want to look at the most artificial expression of a drive, I think you've picked the best one. Sex is probably the most artificial expression of a drive in the world. Like, do you think that... have you seen the weird shit people are into? It's certainly nothing to do with procreation.
Well, you can also say that...
there is some wacky shit now, man. It has nothing to do with procreation.
Yes, and still our numbers grow and grow. So something is...
our numbers are actually declining, rapidly. Our demographics are terrible. You got people like Elon Musk begging to have children because we've got an aging population. So no, but numbers do not. And actually, we're incentivized, if you look at it. Biology is incentivized us not to reproduce, which is why you would argue that people aren't reproducing, right? Because you'd have to say, like, people are actively avoiding having children for some reason.
Yes, because in the West there is a great incentive to not have children. First and foremost, it is economical, and second, is that it places upon individual responsibilities which individuals don't want to have.
Mm-hmm. But and I would say, like, the reason that they don't want to have those is because of their understanding of self, which is sociologically derived, which is why Western nations have it's not just West, actually. It's like China. China's got a massively declining population, but
that is due to the law, not anything other than that.
To do the what?
To the one-child policy. Yeah, one-child policy, which is a law.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, they're trying to encourage now. They're trying to incentivize the population to have more children. But it's not just that. I think it's like what seems to be almost ubiquitous amongst populations around the world. More educated the population, lower the birth rate.
Well, that is not necessarily true. You can point out to things to places like Israel, which has...
Israel has a very specific ideological difference between most of their cultures and in the sense of like how it actually views itself in relation to other nations as well. So like you know what I mean?
Well, I would say, and you can also point out to the places let's say Hungary, which has through elimination of a lot of those incentives not to have children, has significantly improved its population pyramid.
Well, I'm not sure about Hungary. I'll look into that, but I will say, like, don't get me wrong, I don't disagree that there are probably negative incentives that could be removed, but I think that in terms of education, people decide to have children less and less because they view children as a negative experience, as in they actually view the idea of having a child as a limiting factor upon their upon their experience in life. Like a lot of people in the West, for example, just see children as a burden, and I'd say that this is an ideological shift. It's the same thing. It's the same reason why fathers are walking out more on their kids. It's because we've moved from a more religious institutional understanding of self to more consumptive hedonistic market understanding of the self, where it's it's about the expression of certain drives that are materialistic and consumeristic. So like that, I would say, is an ideological shift, which has changed the patterns of behavior, not a biological shift.
Well,
The biological propensities have remained static. The shift has changed in terms of how we understand ourselves.
well, yeah, I would not say that I would, well, first, what the most important thing is that technology, first and foremost, gave us the option of fulfilling our incentives without fulfilling the, I don't want to use the word intensive because, of course, evolution does not have intelligence as such, but its original purpose of the drive, which is to have an organism and not to produce a children. But that is that still does not mean that the original incentive was not meant to.
That wasn't meant to do anything. You mean
Yeah,
it
it was
survived
not meant
because
to
it
do
led
that,
to certain
but
outcomes? That's what you want to say.
Like, of course, like anything else, this sex drive was a random mutation, right? Like everything else, and it manifests through this desire to have an intercourse. And just because we tricked, or well, tricked is maybe not the best word, but circumvented the consequences of the action, it does not mean that the biological drive is the underlying biological drive is still not there.
But the underlying biological drive was again not to reproduce. The underlying biological drive led to reproduction. And even then, even then, like we're not the only society, like in terms of history, that's necessarily had sex without leading to reproduction. I mean, the Greeks were having, like, men were having sex all the time in Greece, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, it's not
nothing to
it's
do
not,
with reproduction. I don't think they expected children.
This is not even unique behavior to humans. Not chimpanzees, sorry, gorillas also.
Yeah, like
engage in homosexual sex until because only few males are allowed in any troop. There is troop of purely males, which then
the Greeks believed there was like a higher form of expression and stuff, man. Like they believed
they can believe whatever they want.
They were like what's it called, like the male supremacists, right? So like they thought like the ideal form of a relationship would be two men. They actually talk about that in one, like the Platonic dialogues.
Yeah, but they again, that is not necessarily the Greek. It is a specific person that wrote that. But
well, I mean, it was like a Greek. It was like I think a pretty common story that they give like a sociological explanation, like to anyway. We're not getting into this, but like the point of what I'm saying here is just that drives are sublimated to the understanding of self. Your understanding of self is sociologically derived. How we construct that sociological environment is dependent upon the best methodology, which will lead you to the greatest expression of your values, specifically your value, and not someone else's, or not some sort of abstract or caused value, so that you can actually take ownership of that value. And
yes.
so like the only way that you can do that is through ethics. And that's why ethics is objective. Like morality is subsequent to ethics. It's actually downstream from ethics.
I would also agree that morality is downstream. No, well, no, wait, upstream. But okay, I would certainly agree that society plays a great role in your understanding of yourself, of course, of of others and of your desires, which are, I believe, biological in nature, and you agree that there is a biological desires,
It's a biological
and
drive.
that you have incentive to go through with your wishes. That is perfectly logical to me, and what I see no reason. I see a gap is to say, okay, you have this wish to whatever, this is your wish, and then you say that no, Conan, it's not your wish to eat an animal, when I clearly know that my wish is to eat the animal.
And you have the belief that it will bring around a certain consequence, which is positive, but I'm saying that your ethical understanding of yourself is flawed. And
Well,
the method that you're engaged in is wrong.
Well, you can say
Like
that this is wrong,
drug
but I feel a want. And you
Yeah.
cannot say that my feelings are not existent, because they exist.
said your feelings aren't existent. I'm saying that you're expressing your drives incorrectly. Like it's like saying like a drug addict is expressing their drives incorrectly. I'm not saying that they don't feel.
No, they're not incorrect. They are correct. I mean,
Uh,
they are fulfilling the wish that they have, right?
I'd say that they were incorrect. I'd say that they're attempting to fulfill their drives in a way which is actually going to lead them to a scenario which is not going to make them feel satisfied.
Well, you cannot know that.
Well, that's why I'm saying we can know. That's self-knowledge.
Yeah, I would agree that this is your projecting your own wants onto others.
No, I think that this is regardless. I actually think that this is. I
No,
don't
I
think
think
this
that
is
is-
projecting my wants. Actually, I would say that this is quite the opposite. I think this requires an equality between agents, an absolute equality of judgment, which is why when we talk about the understanding of the self, it's not derived from one individual. Otherwise, that'd be master slave. Like I'm telling you what you want. It would instead be. It has to be equal. And so when we're talking about the development of ethics and the self, what we're trying to eliminate is unjustified power structures and unjustified judgments about who is and is not valuable within this system, and whose judgments are not not valuable in this system.
I don't agree
And
that
that's
we
why-
do that
that's
we are
why.
doing that.
But I say that I'm arguing that we are, and that we do that, and that's exactly, yeah. And I'd even say it's more metaphysically consistent.
I don't think that is the case.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, if I've not been able to convince you, fair enough. Whatever, man.
Yeah, let's to summarize. I will summarize first. I believe that what you said, that we view ourselves in correlation to another, that others are necessary for understanding of ourselves. Of course, I would not know that I'm human if there are no other humans around. That is completely logical. I would also say that society plays a great deal in how we exercise our biological desires. It also produces some other desires which are not necessarily biological. I would agree with that also. I would say that, as you said, or well, maybe that, but you, maybe that you are not proclaiming that, but you are. You said it that it is possible for others to have their desires push for you to have your desires push onto others. In case when we were talking about shooting Jews, I would say that that is exactly what you are doing. I would say that is that you think that you know what a drug addict is, what to do, what is best for him. Same as Hitler said that the best thing for a German soldier is to kill the Jew. I don't see any difference in those two claims.
Okay. Sorry, you finished? Sorry, I was just going to.
Yeah, I finished.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. Well, thanks there. So I would say that I would say that what I'm arguing for is essentially a metaphysical foundation in terms of the expression of desires as not being determined by a purely biological cause, but by a biological and social element. So yeah, you do have natural drives. Those natural drives are indeterminate. They are experiences of positive and negative stimulation of a reward system around certain behaviors. But how you express that reward system and how you sublimate those drives and understand yourself is ethically constructed, and this is through self-association with others, the production of a sociological, social environment, which essentially gives you the notion of self-understanding, a conceptual web, if you will, which allows you to understand how to express your preferences, how to construct your preferences, and express your desires within your state. You no longer desire food, you desire pizza. You no longer feel a sensation of salivate and you desire pizza. You construct rationally orientated goals around certain ends. A rational means-ends relationship. In terms of your explanation of how individuals engage morally, I see it as fallen flat. I think that there's some major issues there. One, I think your metaphysics is too physically reductive. I think that it needs to incorporate a mental component to be even scientific, and I think Kant showed why in his response to Hegel. I think that the epistemological approach of what you believe your desires are, what you think your preferences are, is false if you don't understand the importance of validation or falsification in relation to group dynamics methodology. And then I would also say that in terms of how you view even instincts, I think that it's vague and unhelpful. I don't think that you point out behaviors or patterns of behaviors, but instead just point towards drives, which nobody denies, but drives don't point towards a human behavior. And you even said yourself that people can act in a way that in accordance with certain what you called moral instincts, even if they don't have them. And it also doesn't take into account, let's say, a variety of different preferences and how those preferences are expressed in the first place, because you see morality as producing ethics, when I would see ethics as allowing for the production of a more developed and rich morality, which is through the development of concepts through self-association. So yeah, well, it's been fun, man.
Yes, I would like to thank you for this conversation, and I will certainly look to incorporate some of the input you provided me to improve my argument.
Yeah, absolutely. And if in the future, I just want to I just quickly add, in case anyone doesn't understand this, we were talking about ethics from me in terms of animals, but we're totally got sidetracked onto like meta ethics and stuff. What a surprise! That's never happens to me. So yeah, but yeah, thanks, and I'll definitely go away and try and make sure that I shore up any, let's say, biological arguments in relation to my position, since it should be natural historical, and maybe need to express the natural part maybe a little bit more succinctly. But I appreciate your time, mate, and have a good one.
You as well. I will now stop the recording.
Okay, I'm gonna bounce and answer a couple of questions from me chat, and then